Chapter 441. A few days later, Lu Shi left with 20 sets of glass tea sets. Zhang Pengji saw him off outside the city. Lanting, you're 16 years old this year. Have you ever thought of revealing your true identity? Lu Shi looked at Zhang Pengji, who was riding on White's back, and said, I'm not asking you to restore your identity now. I just want you to reveal some information to those close to you, in case they can't accept it. It's better to be prepared, just in case. Zhang Pengji thought about it and said, this matter doesn't have to be rushed. Lu Shi did not understand. Zhang Pengji said, why you knows that I'm a girl? He's already accepted the most stubborn part. What's there for me to be afraid of? As for Xiaoyu and Wenjing, SK, they're not blind. In a year or two, I think a simple disguise won't be able to hide my daughter's characteristics. Let them suspect it themselves. It's better for them to discover it themselves than for me to say it myself. Zhang Pengji was clear about her own body. She had already evaluated Lu Shi's body. She concluded that it would be too difficult to rely on binding to make her chest flat-chested in the future. She couldn't possibly say that she had developed chest muscles, could she? After thinking about it, she decided to restore her original identity when her power was slightly stronger and she conquered the whole of Fengyi County or even Wanzhou. Even if Lu Shi hadn't reminded her, Zhang Pengji had the intention to slowly reveal her intentions. Her chest was slowly beginning to develop. It was too uncomfortable to continue binding. In order to release her cleavage and to breathe smoothly, she had to speed up her pace and build her power. Lu Shi saw that she had her own plans and felt reassured. The father and daughter exchanged a few words. Then he asked the horsekeeper to set off. Let's go. Watching Lu Shi's carriage disappear from her sight, Zhang Pengji patted White. The beautiful little girl carried her back to the city. The horse's hooves stomped on the ground. It was as fast as lightning, stirring up a cloud of dust. While Xiangyang district was still under rapid construction, the outside world was already in a mess. Although the Qingyi army had been rejected twice by Zhang Pengji, they still had a great appeal among the uninformed people. In addition, the Dongqing court had adopted a laissez-faire measure against them. This also led to the two northern prefectures becoming a battlefield for the Qingyi army and the Red Lotus group. There was not much difference between the two peasant forces that rose up in revolt, but as time passed, the Red Lotus group gradually developed and strengthened, steadily suppressing the Qingyi army. The reason was that the members of the Qingyi army were bandits, while the Red Lotus group was a group of bandits with beliefs and needs. Was the Dongqing emperor willing to let these peasants act like tyrants in his territory? Of course, he was unwilling, and he even wished for nothing more than to capture all these wicked people, behead them, and exterminate their 9 generations. He had no choice but to allow the north to descend into chaos. 100,000 imperial guards escorting the entire royal family and the court officials to move the capital to Qinzhou was already very taxing. If the Qingyi army or the Red Lotus group were to harass and pursue them from behind, no one could guarantee the safety of the royal family and the important officials. More importantly, the Dongqing emperor would not allow his dignity as the emperor to be trampled on like this. Therefore, when two groups of peasants rose up in revolt in the north, the Dongqing emperor simply turned a blind eye to it and allowed them to fight among themselves, restrain each other, and exhaust each other. It was a blessing in disguise for the team that moved the capital to Qinzhou. They traveled steadily and did not encounter too many disturbances along the way. Now that more than 3 months had passed, the huge and bloated team finally stepped into the border of Qinzhou. Calculating the time, they would reach the new capital in another 7 or 8 days. Everyone from top to bottom could not help but heave a sigh of relief. At that moment, the Dongqing emperor received news that almost made him vomit blood. Unfilial son. The Dongqing emperor was so angry that his hands trembled. He slapped Wu Ma-jun hard, and his face tilted to one side. Wu Ma-jun was called over by the emperor. As soon as the father and son saw each other, he was slapped hard, and he was stunned. Wu Ma-jun hated the emperor to the core. He could not wait for the old man to die immediately, but he still had to put on a sad expression. He knelt at the emperor's feet sincerely and said with tears streaming down his face, "Father, I don't know what I did to make you so angry, but I still beg you to calm down. Don't harm your body because of me." "Father, father?" he cried sincerely and sorrowfully, but his eyes were filled with childish admiration for his father. His acting skills burst forth, moving the audience. However, the Dongqing emperor was full of anger now. How could he be fooled by Wu Ma Jun's performance? The more Wu Ma Jun acted like this, the more disgusted he felt. Therefore, he did not suppress his anger at all. He simply slapped Wu Ma Jun again so that both sides of his face were symmetrical. Bastard! When he spat out these two words, Wu Ma Jun's face turned pale. His eyes revealed a strong hatred. Father, I have no problem with you slapping me, but you have to let me know what I did wrong, right? Wu Ma Jun really hated the emperor in front of him, but he yearned for the emperor's unscrupulous supreme power. Look, if the man in front of him was not the emperor, how could he casually slap him, trample on his dignity, and disregard his character? It was all because the man in front of him was the emperor. At that moment, his inner obsession with the emperor's power climbed to the peak. What did you do wrong? Haha, you bastard. What right do you have to ask me what did you do wrong? The Dongqing emperor was so angry that he wanted to laugh at his stupid son. He was handsome, but why was he so stupid? Did he really think that he was the only smart person in the world? Let me ask you, why was Prince Changsha able to take my transfer order and leave Zhangzhou with his troops to Qinzhou? This man has the ambition of a wolf. Are you blind that you didn't see it? Once he shed all pretense of cordiality, both you and I will die without a burial place. Without the emperor's decree, Prince Changsha would not have been able to pass through all the checkpoints without losing a single soldier. The sun in front of him really made him feel cold. Wu Ma Jun's expression changed. He thought of something and asked in surprise, "Uncle, you brought your troops out of your fief?" The Dongqing emperor laughed coldly. Yes, 150,000 soldiers and horses were only 2 days' journey from here. If it weren't for the fact that I had a lot of trusted subordinates who kept an eye out and sent this matter to me as quickly as possible, would I have to wait until the day my head falls to the ground to find out what kind of good things you have done behind my back? Wu Ma Jun's face turned pale. Father, I did not do this. The Dongqing emperor was furious. He lifted his foot and kicked Wu Ma Jun's heart. Bastard, how dare you quibble? He had obviously used his strength to kick his son until he fainted. The Dongqing emperor took a breath and calmed down a little. He raised his hand and asked the medical officer to examine Wu Ma Jun. Perhaps because he had been too angry recently, the wrinkles on the emperor's face became more obvious and made him look older. Jun, don't be sad. I will give you children in the future. Many, many children. The emperor sat on the side of the bed and looked at the pale-faced woman lying on the bed. Her originally beautiful face was now pale and weak, making one feel pity for her. He comforted her. You're a fool. Why didn't you discuss such an important matter with me? Hui Jun turned sideways. Her tears flowed silently. She looked very pitiful. Her eyes were misty with tears. She looked at herself and said, "You and the fourth prince are father and son. I am just a stubborn person. No matter how deep my relationship with your majesty is, how can it be deeper than the relationship between your majesty and the fourth prince?" Chapter 442. The emperor's gaze was so gentle that it could drown a person. Hui Jun seemed to be a little shy from his gaze and turned her face away slightly. "Beloved, the person I love the most is you," the emperor said affectionately. Hui Jun blushed and immediately thought of something. She said, "You don't blame me anymore?" "When did I blame you?" The Dongqing emperor said. "That's all that unfilial son's fault. Why should I blame you?" Hui Jun's heart calmed down. She blushed shyly, which made people's throats itch. Then what about Prince Changsha? He's leading troops and has a fake imperial edict forged by the fourth prince. It's okay. I'll send someone to ask him to go back. If he refuses... Haha. The Dongqing emperor comforted Hui Jun gently. Don't be afraid. I wish I could hurt myself, but I can't bear to hurt you. Why are you so stupid? Take good care of yourself and give birth to 8 or 10 royal children for me in the future. Hui Jun was extremely shy when she heard this. Of course, she was laughing non-stop in her heart. She would rather give birth to a pig's child than this disgusting animal in front of her. Looking at the emperor's back as he left, Hui Jun, who was originally weak, snorted coldly and fell asleep on her side. When the earthquake in Shangjing happened, Wu Ma Jun asked her to find a way to get the emperor's private seal. She used all kinds of excuses to delay it for more than a month. She would be distracted from time to time in front of the emperor. Her eyes filled with struggle and pain. Later, Wu Ma Jun was forced into a corner. She had to steal the emperor's private seal and fool around with him again. That night, she secretly asked someone to get an abortion pill. Of course, she was definitely not pregnant. After all, her body had been ruined in her early years. Perhaps she would never have the chance to be a mother in this lifetime, so it was fine to take the abortion pill. However, her carelessness was discovered by the emperor. Under his relentless questioning, she painfully revealed that Wu Ma-jun had forced himself on her during the day. She also revealed that Wu Ma-jun had asked for the emperor's private seal. In order to prevent Wu Ma-jun from being eliminated so quickly, she begged the emperor not to pursue this matter. For this, she put in a lot of effort. She drank medicine and tried to commit suicide. In any case, she wouldn't die. The people the emperor had arranged to be by her side wouldn't let anything happen to her. Therefore, Hui Jun was having a good time. The emperor, on the other hand, was exhausted. Perhaps the emperor also wanted to see what Wu Ma-jun was going to do with his personal seal. Perhaps her pleading had worked, so he had been holding it in for the past few days. Until he accidentally received news that Prince Changsho had led his troops to Chenzhou. The emperor was instantly enraged, and that was what had happened just now. Hui Jun did not understand politics, but she knew one thing. It's easier to invite the devil in than to send him away. Prince Changsho rushed over from Kaifeng with hundreds of thousands of troops. He was ambitious, so how could he be willing to be sent back? It would be best if they fought until their faces were red and their necks were swollen. Their brothers would quarrel with each other, and they would not be in the mood to care about the news from the north. She would find a way to kill anything that could threaten her Lang Jun in the cradle. For example, the ambitious princess of the northern borderline. Hui Jun used her status to torment her. His mind was filled with all sorts of nonsense. Hui Jun yawned lazily. She thought about whether she should jump into the water to commit suicide tomorrow, or continue to lie in bed and pretend to be pitiful. When she thought of Wu Ma-jun and his son, she secretly rolled her eyes. How could such filthy people be the noblest royal family in the world? Hui Jun did not like palace fights. In addition, the emperor valued her. He slowly arranged for more and more confidants. The conspiracies in the harem could not be used in front of her. However, as an arrogant and pampered imperial concubine, it did not mean that she would not cause trouble for others. It was boring on the road. Bullying the emperor's beautiful concubines and the old and faded empress became her daily routine. Bring me the bronze mirror. Hui Jun had just fallen asleep when she thought of something. She ordered the palace maid to bring the bronze mirror. Her body was getting healthier. In order to maintain her sickly appearance, she did not torment herself into a serious illness. Instead, the palace maids around her fell ill one after another. She opened her watery eyes and saw that the woman in the mirror was still as beautiful as ever. She sighed faintly. Why was there such a stunning beauty in the world? Daily Narcissism 1/1 completed. Hui Jun was not a person who paid much attention to her appearance. However, she faintly realized that such a perfect body had something to do with her Lang Jun. What kind of method could make a person with average looks become a beauty that could cause the downfall of a city? Hui Jun felt that this was probably the method of a deity. Thus, she slowly began to pay attention to herself in the mirror. She compared herself in the mirror with the one in her memory. Gradually, she developed the habit of looking at herself in the mirror. She enjoyed it very much. Wu Ma-jun's injuries were serious. He was unconscious for most of the night. The medical officer used the best medicine to pull him back from the gates of hell. Seeing that Wu Ma-jun had woken up, Lu Huan heaved a sigh of relief. Husband, you're awake. She was only 13 years old. Her figure was petite and weak. However, her belly was very big. It was only 5 months, but her belly was bulging like a balloon. It was as if she had been pregnant for 8 or 9 months. It made people feel heavy just by looking at her. If an ordinary woman was pregnant with such a big belly, her complexion would not be good. However, Lu Huan was different. Her complexion was getting better day by day. Even her footsteps were lighter. Many servants secretly suspected that there was a problem with the 4th imperial concubine's belly. Could it be a fake pregnancy? Before this ridiculous rumor could spread, Lu Huan had already dragged the person out and beaten him to death. She was pregnant with the precious royal grandson. Who said that it was a fake pregnancy? Wu Ma-jun woke up and looked straight up. He did not say a word. However, deep in his eyes, a thick and dense hatred was brewing. Husband, drink some ginseng soup. I personally brewed it for you. Lu Huan tried hard to fight for Wu Ma Jun's love. Unfortunately, this person did not touch her except on their wedding night. She knew that Wu Ma Jun still had that B***tch, Hui Jun, in his heart. Get lost! Wu Ma Jun raised his hand and knocked the bowl of ginseng soup to the ground. His face was ferocious. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked very terrifying. In the north of Dongqing, it had become a battlefield for the Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus Group. The people were mourning. Only Xiangyang district had become a pure paradise. The construction progress was getting faster and faster. The entire district was full of vitality. The forces in the south of Dongqing were even more nervous. Prince Changshu did not obey the imperial edict and refused to return to his fief. His ambition was obvious. Under such circumstances, the forces in the north borderline also began to stir. Lu Shi returned to Chongzhou under such circumstances. He took a brief look at the government affairs during this period of time. He discovered that there were faint rumors in the north borderline. Obviously, they felt that the time was ripe. They wanted to take advantage of Dongqing's complete weakness to destroy Dongqing in one fell swoop and occupy the central plains at the lowest cost. Their ambition was not small. Lu Shi roughly estimated the situation in Dongqing and sneered coldly in his heart. Before the three tribes of the north borderline made a move against him, he would first make a move against them. Crack! Lu Shi took a bite of the seasonal fruit. His mouth watered. He waved his hand and summoned his butler. The Lu residents had many businesses in the open and in the dark. Their business network had already spread throughout the north borderline. This was an invisible intelligence network. Before the outbreak of chaos, he wanted to make a fortune. Otherwise, when the north borderline completely declared war on Dongqing, such good business would be rare. Thinking of the 20 sets of exceptional treasures, Lu Shi's smile grew wider. Chapter 443. The northern borderline was vast and had a small population. Coupled with the years of war, it was difficult for the people to survive. In the past 20 years, the royal family of the northern borderline, under the suggestion of the wise ones, finally agreed to cultivate and recuperate. They encouraged the people to have children and actively opened up business and trade with neighboring countries. Without a doubt, this policy was very correct. Today, the three tribes of the northern borderline were prosperous and lively. The country was extremely powerful. More than a decade ago, they launched a sneak attack on the border of Dongqing and took over the three cities of Chongzhou and Shangyu County. This made the northern borderline arrogant and arrogant. They even thought that they had the absolute power to enter the central plains. After all, Dongqing was too weak now. It could not withstand the ravages of their armored cavalry. The country's demise was imminent. The wise ones of the northern borderline realized this and hurriedly beat them down. Only then did they manage to suppress the impetuousness and arrogance of the northern borderline. In recent years, Princess Anyina had interfered. Dongqing's political situation had become more and more chaotic. The country's power had plummeted. In the eyes of the northern borderline, Dongqing was already in the bag. As soon as their king of the northern borderline gave the order, they could mobilize their troops to attack Dongqing. Under such circumstances, the king of the northern borderline could no longer hold back his pride. The king's authority was getting stronger and stronger. Until now, the wise one's honest and harsh words had aroused the king's disgust. This impetuous and arrogant atmosphere affected the entire northern borderline from top to bottom. Wu Liba, the strategist of the northern borderline's wise ones, seemed rough and rash, but he was actually a meticulous strategist. He realized the hidden dangers of the superficial arrogance in the northern borderline. He had advised the king of the northern borderline several times. No matter how weak Dongqing was, it was once one of the top 5 in the central plains. They should be extremely cautious when facing this enemy. Since ancient times, were there any lack of examples of arrogant soldiers being defeated? However, no matter how Wu Liba quoted from the classics, the king of the northern borderline did not listen. He even berated him harshly. Faced with this situation, Wu Liba was both worried and sad. He was not afraid of anything else. He was afraid that the northern borderline would become arrogant and look down on the enemy because of a small victory. Today, he was scolded by the king of the northern borderline again because of his advice. He hoped that the king of the northern borderline would order an order to restrain the excessive extravagance of the subjects and the exaggerated status of showing off their wealth. He pointed out the shortcomings and spoke generously, but the king of the northern borderline did not accept it. Wu Liba sighed. This was not a good thing for the north borderline, but he could do nothing about it. He couldn't tell when it started, but this demonic wind and evil qi had spread throughout the entire northern borderline. Filled with rage, Wu Liba returned home, exhausted both physically and mentally. A few female slaves came forward to serve him. He waited for a long time but did not see his wife. His thick eyebrows were tightly knitted together and his eyes were filled with undisguised unhappiness. He really looked down on this crude and uncultured wife of his. However, this marriage was fought for by Wu Liba's elders. Because his wife's maiden family ran a trading company, their wealth was well known in the northern borderline. When he marched to war, he needed the help of this generous wife to supply his rations. On account of this, Wu Liba felt that he could still tolerate this wife. However, men, especially men from the northern borderline, which one of them didn't want a shrewish wife to be gentle to them? This was a thought that even Wu Liba could not avoid. He had a strong desire to possess and control his wife. If he returned home one day and did not see his wife, Wu Liba's mood would become very bad. The northern borderline did not value a woman's chastity. There was no such thing as loyalty between husband and wife. If the wife was not satisfied with or did not like her husband, she might turn around and have an affair or keep a gigolo. Wu Liba believed that he was well versed in the culture of the Central Plains. Of course, he could not accept his wife climbing over the wall to find a man. Whenever his wife was not within his sight, Wu Liba could not help but worry that she was fooling around with a gigolo. He was in a bad mood and asked the female slave in a gruff voice, "Where did Madam go?" The female slave replied with trepidation, "Madam went out with a few other noble ladies. She will be back in about 4 hours." Hearing this, Wu Liba's mood became even worse. He snorted angrily, "Lead the way, let's go take a look." His wife was already crude and uncultured. If she mingled with those women, how could her upbringing be good? At this moment, Wu Liba's wife was shopping heroically. Yes, shopping. When people went out to shop, they did not buy the good ones, only the expensive ones. One person could buy up an entire street. Her family was rich, and the northern borderline valued women very much. Hence, Wu Liba's wife did not lack money. Moreover, her husband was a brave general of the northern borderline. He was from the Wise Ones clan and was highly respected. Even the king of the northern borderline had to treat him with respect. Wu Liba's wife's life could not be more comfortable. When she was bored, she would bring a group of sisters to sweep the streets. Now, a group of northern borderline noble ladies were eagerly waiting for the treasure house's shopkeeper to deliver the treasures. "Ladies, sorry to keep you waiting." The treasure house's shopkeeper was of mixed blood. He had the gentleness and elegance of a man from the Central Plains, but also the boldness and valiance of a man from the northern borderline. If not for the fact that he was already 45 years old and had a few granddaughters and grandsons, many high-ranking officials in the northern borderline would not be at ease to let their wives frequent the treasure house. This man was too charismatic. If he were to sleep with his wife while shopping, it would be a grievance. The shop often sold precious smuggled goods. This was also the favorite place of the northern borderline's aristocrats because the goods were good and expensive. The man held a box steadily in both hands. His slightly thin lips spoke in an elegant and tactful tone. These noble ladies even dared to press their husbands to the ground and beat them up. Usually, when they shouted, their voices could be heard from miles away. However, in front of this elegant middle-aged man, they could not help but display the demeanor of a lady. They patiently waited for him to slowly open the box and reveal the rare treasures inside. "This is a colored glaze ware. Ladies, please take a look." After the box was opened, the ladies' eyes were all attracted by the items lying quietly in the box. Wu Liba's wife only came to her senses after a while. She opened her mouth and asked, "Mr. Shopkeeper, how much are these treasures?" The shopkeeper said, "This is a set of tea ware. The quality and workmanship are rare in the world. The price is a little expensive." Wu Liba's wife said with a smile, "Could it be that shopkeeper is worried that I cannot afford it?" The shopkeeper said, "Madam must be joking. Madam's family is rich enough to rival a country. Everyone in the Central Plains knows that. How could Madam not be able to afford it? Even if you really cannot afford it, for Madam's sake, this set of treasures should lower its price and beg you to take it away." A treasure should be matched with a beautiful woman. Only a beautiful woman like Madame can bring out its value. Madame Wu Liba's cheeks reddened. The smile on her face grew brighter. Shopkeeper is really getting better at talking. There was no woman who did not like to be praised. Madame Wu Liba was even more so. Although the other ladies were not as rich as this one, they were also extravagant. They hurriedly inquired about the price. The shopkeeper's eyelids narrowed slightly. He said gently, "This set is of above-average quality. It is not considered the best. Therefore, it is only sold for 25,000 strings of coins." 25,000 strings of coins? This price made many of the ladies hesitate. It was not that they could not afford it, but they felt that it was slightly expensive. Chapter 444. Why didn't he bring out the best? Of course, it was to test the ladies' acceptance of these colored glaze wares. Otherwise, how could he set the highest price? The shopkeeper still had a smile on his face as he calmly pacified her. "Madam, please don't blame me. I'm not being rude to you, it's just that. Sigh, if this humble shop brought out the best treasures, it would raise your standards. When that time comes, what treasures should this humble shop bring out to attract your attention and make you linger here?" Madame Wu Liba blushed and clicked her tongue. "Just bring out the best. Why are you worrying about this? Could it be that all the things this madam had bought from you over the years were all fake? Good or bad, when did I not take care of your business?" The shopkeeper smiled warmly and turned to go upstairs to retrieve the set of glass tea wares that he wanted to sell at a high price. The previous set was already eye-catching enough, but in front of this set, even the slightest flaw was magnified. Madame Wu Liba said directly, "I want this set." "Shopkeeper, just quote the price directly. You won't miss a cent or a copper coin." The shopkeeper smiled helplessly and said, "If any businessman were to meet such an easy-going customer like you, he would wake up laughing even in his dreams." Madame Wu Liba asked boldly, "Shopkeeper, will you laugh tonight because of me?" Of course. Originally, the owner had set the price at 20,000 to 30,000 strings of coins, but the shopkeeper felt that there was still room for appreciation. Wasn't the most successful businessman trying to maximize the value of a product? He pondered in his heart and did not speak too confidently, in case there were better quality colored glazewares next time and it would be difficult to clean up the mess. If these rich ladies were to kick up a fuss, his old bones would not be able to handle it. With a quick thought, he already had a way to deal with it. He said, "This set is the best in this batch. It's slightly more expensive than the previous set, 41,000 strings of coins." Madame Wu Liba was not stupid. She understood the meaning behind his words. "Shopkeeper, are you saying that there will be better colored glaze wares? How could that do?" If she was going to buy, she had to buy the most expensive one. Only then would it match her status. The shopkeeper took out the prepared draft and said, "Ladies, do you know the origin of these colored glaze wares?" The madams shook their heads. "I don't know. I've never heard of it." They were also used to seeing good things. There were not many treasures smuggled and sold in the treasure house, but there were almost none that were as beautiful as the colored glaze wares that could awaken their dead young girls' hearts with just a glance. Although colored glaze wares were a little expensive, it wasn't that they couldn't afford them. However, they had to buy things that were worth it, or else they would lose their value. There's a strange record of the great Xia dynasty. There was a golden phoenix descending from the sky of the Plum region, and at the same time, a baby girl was born. This baby girl was one of the founding fathers of the great Xia dynasty. After her death, she was conferred the title of Marquis of Inner Pass, Duke Su. The shopkeeper explained in detail to the madams. These colored glass artifacts were found at the place where the golden phoenix landed. Each one of them is magnificent. It's just that the person who discovered it was too crude and ignorant, causing some damage to the glazed artifact. It's no longer as stunning as it was before. Madame Wu Liba was the most cultured among the madams, and she loved to show off her culture. She said, "I've heard of this story before. It said that Marquis of Inner Pass, Duke Su, had the life of a golden phoenix. She was a goddess who descended from the heavens. These colored glaze wares, could they be celestial items that came with Duke Su from the heavenly palace?" The shopkeeper hesitated and said, "I don't know about this. These colored glaze wares have been buried deep underground for hundreds of years. A while ago, the earthquake in Dongqing allowed them to see the light of day. The store had to expend a lot of resources to get a few sets of them. Now we're still thinking of ways to get more. The set in front of us is the best one in our shop's collection. When the madams heard this, they couldn't help but be surprised. Their already wavering hearts became even more one-sided. Even if they didn't have a legendary background, they were still tempted. Now that they heard this story, they wanted to snatch it. Madame Wu Liba saw the expressions of the madams and secretly regretted it. Why did she mention celestial items for no reason? The shopkeeper took in their expressions and smiled warmly. "Madam, do you want to buy them?" Madame Wu Liba decisively made the decision. Without waiting for the others to speak, she said, "Of course I want to buy them. It's just 41,000 strings of coins. Shopkeeper, wrap them up and send them to my house. Also, if you have better colored glaze wares here, don't forget to inform me." The few madams actually wanted to buy them at a higher price. However, this treasure house had its own rules and wouldn't resell them. If they increased the price, they might even offend Madame Wu Liba. It really wasn't worth it. Every treasure had a price. If a customer was the first to buy it at the set price, even if the subsequent customers increased the price by 100 times, they wouldn't resell it. The few madams were regular customers. Of course, they knew the shopkeeper's temperament. The more upright he was, the more it showed his strength of character. He was obsessed with earning money, but he didn't stink of money. Many noble ladies from the north borderline wanted to invite him to be their guest. However, he was loyal to his wife. The Princess Royal of the north borderline had also offered him an olive branch, but he wasn't moved. He had such strength of character, humor, looks, and talent. There wasn't a single part of him that wasn't good. How could he not be attractive? Another plump madam opened her mouth. "Shopkeeper, take out all the colored glaze wares here." The shopkeeper smiled and agreed. He personally brought them out. When the 9 sets of glass tea wares were lined up, the dazzling sight made even some madams who didn't have any intention of buying feel tempted. At this moment, there was only one thought in everyone's mind. Don't be afraid of the price. Buy, buy, buy. The shopkeeper had been dealing with these noble ladies for many years. He naturally knew their extravagant purchasing power. They always bought the most expensive and not the best. These 9 sets of glass tea wares, the cheapest was 23,000 strings of coins. Excluding Madame Wu Liba's set, the most expensive was 33,000 strings of coins. The few madams bought 5 sets and kept the 4 cheapest sets. The total was 146,000 strings of coins. Sigh, this money was easy to earn. It was even better than robbing. The shopkeeper sighed silently in his heart. He admired his young master even more. He had seen his old master Madame Gu's money-making methods. Ever since Madame Gu passed away, the shopkeeper had never seen someone who was more ruthless in earning money than robbing a bank. Until he met Madame Gu's child. He could only sigh with emotion. When Xueqi asked him for help, his heart that had been dead for a long time came back to life. He loved to earn money, but he loved the thrill of tricking people even more. He had obviously slaughtered the customers until not even their bones were left, but the other party still felt that he had earned a lot. Based on Madame Gu's evaluation of him, it was probably because he had gained intellectual satisfaction from a mentally handicapped customer. In short, the feeling of superiority was indeed addicting to the shopkeeper. Chapter 445. Madame Wu Liba paused and asked, "What else?" The treasure house was the most famous smuggler and antique shop in the northern borderline. There was no most expensive item, only more expensive. Many nobles in the northern borderline frequented this shop to show off their status. To be honest, this shop had a wide network of connections. Almost anything could be obtained. Most importantly, the background of the shop was very clean, which was reassuring. "Ladies, please wait a moment. I'll bring it for you to see." With that, the shopkeeper went upstairs and brought back a red sandalwood box the size of a grown man's palm. The outside was carved with complicated and gorgeous patterns. A strange fragrance wafted in the air. Many ladies were curious and wanted to stretch their necks to take a look. But they still sat where they were, waiting for the shopkeeper to bring out their precious children. "Ladies, please take a look." With that, the shopkeeper opened the hidden button with his well-maintained and fair fingers, revealing the treasure inside. There was plenty of light in the room, and the bright light reflected from the light blinded their eyes. almost making them unable to open their eyes. There was even a madam who was so scared that she raised her hand to cover her eyes. Her beautiful face turned pale, and her rough voice became sharp. She screamed in surprise. "Ah, what is this? How can it be so dazzling?" After a while, the crowd slowly adjusted to it. Sounds of inhaling could be heard in the room. Inside the red sandalwood box was an exquisite dragon and phoenix hairpin. The hairpin was crystal clear and came from the same source as the previous colored glass wares. A dragon and a phoenix were entwined together. The dragon's scales and phoenix's feathers were fine and lifelike. The phoenix spread its wings, ready to fly. The dragon looked like it was about to soar into the sky. Between the phoenix and the dragon's mouth, there was a string of transparent beads strung together to form tassels. Under the sunlight, it was so beautiful that one could not take their eyes off it. The shopkeeper carefully took it out. The beads collided slightly and the crisp sound was very pleasing to the ear. Xueqi gave him 20 glass tea wares and the dragon and phoenix hairpin. He was allowed to decide the price. Seeing the eyes of the nobles in the northern borderline, the shopkeeper knew that the dragon and phoenix hairpin could be sold for a very good price. Women could not like exquisite antiques, but they could not resist the temptation of dazzling jewelry. The shopkeeper smiled warmly. It took a lot of effort to get this. "Ladies, please take a look. What do you think?" Madame Wu Liba shouted. "Buy." Shopkeeper, please be straightforward and quote a price. The other madams were not willing. What? They had bought the best glaze, and they still wanted to monopolize this peerless treasure. The plump lady raised her chin slightly, her eyes slanting. She said unhappily, "Madame Wu, this isn't right. Everyone didn't say that they wouldn't buy it, so how could they let you buy it all? I also want to buy this hairpin." Shopkeeper, we are old acquaintances and know the rules here. Why don't we go to the highest bidder? The shopkeeper knew how to maximize the value, and he also knew that this kind of transparent and dazzling jewelry could not only be sold once, so he couldn't be too ruthless the first time, or else he wouldn't be able to make use of it in the future. This principle was the same as raising pigs and only killing them during festivals. Because they were fat, it would feel good to slaughter them. "Madams, please listen to me. There's news from my store that there's more than one piece of jewelry." The shopkeeper spoke up to ease the atmosphere. "It's just that they're currently in someone else's hands. It'll take some time to get them. Madams, if you can wait for a while, then you can buy it again. Don't hurt the harmony." When the madams heard this, their expressions turned slightly better. They believed in the shopkeeper's ability, and indeed, he could get whatever he wanted. However, the earlier they bought, the earlier they could enjoy. There were only so many treasures, but there were many people fighting over them. When the reputation of this dragon phoenix hairpin spread, who knew how many northern borderline madams would want to buy it? How many competitors would there be then? Thinking of this, everyone had their own thoughts. At this moment, a familiar male voice came from outside. Madame Wu Liba's expression changed, and she was faintly unhappy. The shopkeeper secretly raised his eyebrows. He had long heard of the reputation of the northern borderline's fierce general Wu Liba, but this was the first time he had seen him in person. If it was an ordinary person, he would probably be so frightened that he would bow and scrape, or even make a fool of himself. But who was the shopkeeper? He had dealings with many northern borderline nobles. Back then, the Princess Royal of the northern borderline had a crush on him, and wanted him to be her guest. He had managed to deal with such a large entourage, so why would he be afraid of Wu Liba? On the other side, when Wu Liba found out that his wife had spent 41,000 strings of coins to buy a set of flashy but impractical items, his face turned green with anger. "It's just something to scare people. You're quite generous, wife. You don't even know that you've been cheated," Wu Liba said. Madame Wu Liba snorted and rolled her eyes at her husband. Pointing at the set of glass tea sets, she said, "You say that I've been cheated. Then why don't you tell me where they came from? Haven't you been to Dongqing and have a deep understanding of the customs and objects there? You can tell that they're not ordinary. Then why don't you take a look and see if they're treasures?" Wu Liba was choked by his own wife and was momentarily speechless. His brown-black face was twisted together. After a long while he said embarrassedly, "They look like porcelain." Nowadays, there was already the technology to bake porcelain. However, the porcelain that was produced was mostly of poor quality. There were crisscrossing cracks on the surface. There were not many that looked good, so most of the people in the Central Plains still used pottery. As for porcelain, Wu Liba kept a set in his study. He often played with it. Porcelain was considered a luxury item in the Central Plains. The shopkeeper curled his lips and said in a warm voice, "Porcelain is mostly green or gray in color. It's of poor quality and is made from ordinary clay. Although I don't know what material is used to make these colored glasswares, they are clear and shiny. The texture is crisp and does not look like something from the mortal world. How can mere porcelain be compared to them?" Wu Liba heard this and could not explain it. He had some understanding of the things in the Central Plains, but he had indeed never seen anything made of this material. The color of the clay on the ground was mostly gray, black, yellow, and brown. It was impossible to make it transparent. Madame Wu Liba saw that he could not say anything and said angrily, "Humph, it's not your money. Why are you so distressed?" Wu Liba became more and more embarrassed, but he did not dare to argue with his wife, lest others laugh at him. Seeing the shopkeeper frown and lower his eyes, he became even angrier. The culture of the North Borderline was so superficial and extravagant. It was impossible to avoid this treasure house. Even if other similar shops popped up like mushrooms after the rain, the treasure house still sat firmly on the fishing platform. Who knew how much money it had earned over the years? Wu Liba was furious. "It's you scoundrels who make the North Borderline so luxurious." The shopkeeper said smoothly, "General, you are wrong. Life is short. You have tens of thousands of taels of silver at home. You can enjoy delicacies from the land and sea. Why do you still have to live like this? Your wife is of high status. Her clothes and daily necessities should be in line with her status. Otherwise, how is this different from wearing silk clothes and walking at night?" The shopkeeper's words could also be translated as, "You don't have money to buy for your wife. Your wife will buy for herself. Why are you blabbering?" Chapter 446. Wu Liba had nothing to say and could only glare at the shopkeeper with his bell-like eyes. The shopkeeper was still as graceful as ever. With Wu Liba as a teammate who was a burden, Wu Liba's wife was unable to purchase the dragon and phoenix hairpin. Under the persuasion of the shopkeeper, it was bought by a noblewoman for the price of 57,000 strings of coins. The lady took off the pearls on her head on the spot and put on the dragon and phoenix hairpin. The tassels and pearls collided with each other as she walked, making a pleasant tinkling sound. When she walked under the sun, the bright and beautiful colors made her the center of attention. The other ladies saw it and felt even more regret. Wu Liba's wife was so angry that her face turned green. If it wasn't for her husband dragging her down, the hairpin would have definitely belonged to her. Now, it was on someone else's head. She suppressed her anger and repeatedly reminded the shopkeeper to inform her immediately if there was any stock. The shopkeeper agreed with a smile, but only he knew what he was thinking in his heart. The easier it was to get something, the less valuable it was. He would let these ladies covet the dragon and phoenix hairpin for a while. When they were done with jealousy and hatred, he would introduce new glass jewelry. Would he still have to worry about not being able to sell it at a high price? Although the wise ones were an eyesore, they were indeed much smarter than the simple-minded people of the northern borderline. The shopkeeper had lived in the northern borderline for so many years and knew the internal situation of the northern borderline very well. Now that Dongqing was in chaos, if he did not prepare early, he was afraid that he would not be able to stop the northern borderline's cavalry. As a merchant, the only thing he could do was to earn more money from the people of the northern borderline and make the atmosphere here more welcoming to foreigners. Since ancient times, it was easiest to earn money from women and children. His old boss's words were indeed wise. The northern borderline had no shortage of gold and silver. Such a large transaction could not be done with scattered copper coins. Naturally, it had to be converted into gold, silver, and jewelry. Therefore, when the gold and silver worth a total of 203,000 strings of coins was delivered to the shop, even the shopkeeper, who was used to seeing large amounts of money, could not help but sigh. This money is simply easier to earn than the wind. Because the treasure house did a lot of smuggling business, there was a price difference between the two places. Therefore, when he took out a sum of money to buy 500 horses of medium quality and nearly 10,000 sheepskins, no one suspected anything. They only thought that the treasure house was going to Dongqing to make a fortune from the war. The northern borderline produced many good horses. The treasure house did not buy the best war horses, so it did not matter if they sold them. As for the sheepskin, they did not care about it. Every household had such a thing, and even if they laid it on the ground as a street stall, the smell would still be too strong. Therefore, when this batch of resources was transported back to Chongzhou with the remaining gold, silver, and jewelry, no one pursued the matter. When Lu Shi saw this, he let out a long sigh. Money that comes with the wind. The shopkeeper had already returned to his Central Plains attire. He wore a crown on his head and a wide-sleeved coat. Other than his face being more profound than the people from the Central Plains, he looked like a native of Dongqing. He was amused by Lu Shi's words. So much gold, silver, and jewelry. How strong must the wind be to blow them up? Lu Shi choked and put his hand to his forehead. He said helplessly, Your mouth is getting sharper. Ever since Gu Min passed away, the shopkeeper had not set foot in Dongqing for many years. If Lu Shi did not believe in the shopkeeper's loyalty to Gu Min, he would not have dared to hand over the business of the second branch of the Lu family to manage. Now that he had personally come back, Lu Shi was quite surprised. In the past, when I asked you to come back during festivals, you said you were not feeling well. Why did you come back now? The shopkeeper squinted slightly and said, I came back to see the young master. The business that Gu Min ran should be inherited by a descendant. The shopkeeper had been quite worried before, but now he was not. In terms of business, the young master was much more ruthless than the old master. The old master was at least doing proper business, but the young master was directly robbing. Lu Shi asked, What about these sheepskins and horses? The shopkeeper said softly, In another month, the weather will start to turn cold. The earthquake in Dongqing has turned the north into a shiraba. The people have lost their homes. How much money can they bring with them? This winter will not be easy. These sheepskins are cheap. If we find a way to remove the stench and make them into clothes, they should be warmer than ordinary linen. The shopkeeper continued, As for horses, the northern borderline iron cavalry is already mature, but in Dongqing, Sai, how can an army fight without horses? These horses are not in good condition and do not have the bloodline of war horses. They are often slaughtered for meat, so it will not arouse suspicion. Because it was the first time, the shopkeeper could not buy too much. He could only plan slowly. Lu Shi was silent for a while. You are more careful than I am. I thank you on behalf of Lanting. I have used my connections to buy a batch of food in Hu County. Send it to Lanting when the time comes. She has managed it well. She is indeed the daughter that Amin has high hopes for. She was the first female empress in history. How could she not be outstanding? The shopkeeper said, The parents are extraordinary, so the children are naturally extraordinary. After saying that, the shopkeeper seemed to have thought of something. He frowned and asked, How is your control over Hu County now? Lu Shi smiled. It's all right. Although he had been transferred to Chongzhou to be the Chongzhou magistrate, Hu County was the base camp that he had managed for many years. The new chief of Hu County appointed by the Dongqing emperor was too weak. He had not been able to completely control Hu County after a few years. He was also unlucky to encounter the earthquake in the north. The royal family moved the capital and the entire court's prestige was greatly reduced. Now he was only an honorary chief with an empty title. Otherwise, how could Lu Shi have the ability to use his connections to buy a large batch of autumn food? After a few years, he had already accumulated a large amount of rice. It was definitely enough to support the northern battlefield. However, his daughter seemed to have other plans. Lu Shi did not make a move and was prepared to act according to his daughter's intentions. Lu Shi asked the shopkeeper to bring 200,000 dawn of food first. He also sent 5,000 infantrymen and 2,000 cavalry archers to escort them. The north was in chaos now. The Red Lotus Group and the Tsing-Yi army were fighting fiercely. If they were not careful along the way, they might lose everything. In the blink of an eye, it was the middle of September. The heat of summer gradually subsided. The people of Xiangyang district changed into cool autumn clothes. Feng Jin's Chongqing was already 5 months old. She was lively and active. She could often roll from one corner of the room to the other. She was also impatient to stay in the house. She often wanted to roll out of the room. When the maidservants wanted to carry her, she would make a squeaking sound and slap their hands. If they carried her stubbornly, her crying voice could be heard far away. She still cried without tears. Over time, Feng Jin and his wife also let the child be. However, they never expected that the older the child, the more willful her temperament became. For example, today, she especially clung to Feng Jin. She hugged his sleeves and refused to let go. She tried her best to crawl into his sleeves. Jingxian, carry Chongqing away. If I don't go to the government office, Lanting will mock me again. Chongqing probably understood the meaning of Feng Jin's words. She held her mouth and silently wept. Tears fell one by one. She did not cry or howl. She looked at Feng Jin silently and cried silently. After a while, she became a tearful person. Wei Jingxian's heart ached. She really could not bear to see her child cry. She could only say dotingly, "Should we hide Chongqing and bring her over?" Chapter 447. Then you coax her. If Chongqing's eyes get hurt from crying, won't you feel bad? Wei Jingxian put a big label on Feng Jin. Feng Jin was speechless. He looked down at his daughter who was grabbing his sleeve and refused to let go. Feng Jin shook his head helplessly. I really owed you and your daughter in my previous life. Therefore, Feng Jin's posture when he went to the government office today was a little strange. The people below did not dare to ask. At most, they looked at him strangely. Feng Jin went to the government office shamelessly. Because it was still early, he quietly went to his seat, pulled a cushion over, and hid the lump of fat sleeve under the low table. However, Chongqing's temper was hard to understand. She was very obedient on the way, but once she entered the government office, she did not want to stay in his sleeve anymore. Why what's wrong with you? Qiguan Rank's work was about to end. Nearly 80% of the people had completed their registration. His work was not so rushed. He simply slowed down his pace and no longer worked overtime crazily. He ate and slept well every day. After a few days, his thin and sunken cheeks had also regained some flesh. He looked a little more plump, and his complexion was rosy. Therefore, during this period, the first person to come to the government office was often not him, but either Feng Jin or Xueqi. Feng Jin felt his daughter struggling, and his expression changed slightly. No, nothing. He was about to grab his little daughter back, but she rolled out of his sleeve unexpectedly. Qiguan Rang was shocked. He looked at Feng Jin, then looked at the chubby girl. He opened his mouth but could not say anything for a long time. I didn't expect that you, Feng Huayu, are also involved in human trafficking, right? Qiguan Rang's mind changed. He had clearly guessed the identity of the little girl, but he still laughed and joked. Feng Jin's face turned red. He simply gave up and closed his eyes to admit it. Chongqing is too clingy. This morning, she grabbed my sleeve and refused to let go. After crying silently for a quarter of an hour, I really could not bear to bring her here. She is very obedient. She doesn't even cry normally. If you give her something, she can play with it for a long time. Qiguan Rang reached out to Chongqing. I didn't say that your daughter is noisy. Come, eldest niece, let Uncle Qiguan hug you. Qiguan Rang was actually very fond of children. His first wife had passed away due to illness and did not leave behind any children. Later on, he married Master Wei Yuan's eldest concubine's daughter. The two of them were very loving after their marriage and only gave birth to a daughter 2 years later. However, he felt that it was chaotic outside and did not bring the mother and daughter with him when he left Chongzhou. Chongqing was friendly and bold. She climbed up Qiguan Rang's clothes. Her movements were swift. Her hands and feet are really strong. Sister-in-law is really good at raising children. Qiguan Rang's posture of carrying the child was very standard. Chongqing was not afraid of him. She reached out and wanted to touch his hair crown. Feng Jin secretly turned his face away. This daughter of his was too bold and aggressive. She did not have the slightest hint of gentleness that a woman of the Feng family should have. Chongqing was very generous and gave Qiguan Rang a wet, saliva-dripping kiss on his face. Pop, after the Grand Prince, she smiled and opened her mouth, revealing a small row of teeth that had just emerged. Your daughter is more likable than you. Qiguan Rang made a brief comment. Unlikable Feng Jin. Let her play by herself. Don't disturb you. Although Feng Jin had brought Chongqing over, he did not want to delay his colleague's work because of this. It's all right. The child is still too young. If I don't keep an eye on her, she will easily get into trouble. Qiguan Rank's main job was to be responsible for registration and sorting out the household register. Fortunately, he still had 9 girls who were busy at his side. As his immediate superior, it was fine for him to be a little lazy. You, on the other hand, haven't finished sorting out the case files. I'm afraid you'll be busy for a while. Feng Jin was speechless. He watched helplessly as Qiguan Rang carried his daughter to the side and played with her. In just a short while, his daughter was already glued to Qiguan Rang. No. Whose daughter was this? Chongxing giggled. Her big eyes were about to turn into slits. She climbed up and down Qiguan Rang's body intimately. Not long after, Xueqi also arrived. Seeing that there was an additional girl in the government office, he raised his eyebrows and walked around as if there was no one around. He was extremely cold. Be careful. Hide the child well in case the Lord sees her and snatches her from you, Xueqi said in a low voice. Qiguan Rang raised his eyebrows. Don't worry. With the Lord's temperament, she will not come every day. Zhang Pengji did not come to the government office every day. Every day, she was either playing with mud or playing with wood. During this period of time, she was almost always in the carpentry workshop, working on some siege weapon model. Meng Hun and Luo Yue seemed to be absent-minded. They ran behind her all day. Specifically, they ran behind those models. On the other hand, Li Yun recorded the cultivated fields and divided them carefully. He was prepared to rent them out to each household during spring plowing. Issues such as farming tools and cattle were also put on the agenda. Li Yun still had to follow orders to Chengde County to purchase grain seeds. He was so busy that his feet barely touched the ground. The construction of the district town had already reached the 3rd stage. The main roads in the city were basically completed. The roads were paved with bluestone bricks. Even when it rained, the roads were still clean. In Xiangyang district, there was a place that the people called the Noble District. There were rows upon rows of newly built houses. It was extremely beautiful. Speaking of the Noble District, one had to mention the 20 girls that Zhang Pengji had previously taken in. Most of them came from wealthy families or country gentlemen's families. Zhang Pengji returned their family property to them after settling the accounts. They expressed that they were willing to pay for a new house. After all, their old houses had been destroyed. Some of the land had been reclaimed by the district headquarters. They had nowhere to go. Seeing the new house that was being built uniformly, everyone was tempted. You are now considered a part of the district headquarters. You have helped the district headquarters greatly. Indeed, you should be rewarded according to your contributions. Let's do it this way. The 5th batch of 2-level houses will be built for 4,000 strings of coins each. If you can't afford it, you can pay a deposit first and the rest will be paid in installments. If you agree, I will sign a new contract for you. Faced with the requests of the girls, Zhang Pengji thought for a while and came up with a compromise. Do you have any thoughts of entering the district headquarters to work? You can choose to pay with grain or money of equivalent value. They could still manage the manpower they had now, but when their territory expanded in the future, they would probably go crazy with work. Taking advantage of the buffer time, they should first train a group of people. If they needed more people in the future, they could directly send them over. Just thinking about it made them happy. The girls listened to Zhang Pengji's suggestion and opened their eyes wide in surprise. During this period of time working in the district headquarters, the hard work had diverted their attention. It had more or less soothed the hurt they had suffered from the Xueqi army. Although it was very tiring, the girls quite liked the feeling of working on their own. It was much more fulfilling than staying in the backyard. Hearing that they could receive a monthly salary, they were even more tempted. Some of them agreed on the spot. Others also agreed after some hesitation. Without Zhang Pengji, they would have long been tortured to death by the Xueqi army. Even if they did not die, their family property would have fallen into the hands of other clansmen. Lonely women who had lost their chastity could hardly survive in today's world. The young district magistrate in front of them gave them a chance. Only fools would not seize it. If they had a position in the district magistrate, the shameless elders in the clan would not be able to force them to do anything. Without much effort, Zhang Pengji recruited another 23 literate and good employees. They were deeply grateful to her. They would not complain no matter how late they worked. They rushed to do any paperwork. Chapter 448. The maids in the residence always treated Chongqing carefully. Of course, she did not like maids. Qiguanrang did not think that children were delicate. Not only would he pat her but to urge her to crawl forward, but he would also tempt her with brightly colored things. Therefore, Chongqing liked to play with Qiguanrang. He was a good playmate. She crawled quickly with her hands and feet, giggling non-stop. Sparkling saliva hung from the corner of her mouth, and her smile was very bright. TSK, she looks like you and sister-in-law, but this character. How do I put it, they are not alike at all. Qiguanrang could not imagine Feng Jin crawling while giggling. The key was that this little girl had a bad temper. It was okay to tease her occasionally, but if she got angry, she would argue with you directly. She was willful and overbearing. Feng Jin buried his head in the files. His daughter was playing happily with Qiguanrang, which made him feel sour and pitiful. She is just a child who doesn't know anything. What character can you see? Feng Jin said as he put the organized files in the designated position. Then, he took out another scroll and slowly spread it on the table. He glanced at Qiguanrang from the corner of his eyes. This guy was holding his glass and waving it in front of Chongqing. Then, he led the little girl to crawl from the north side of the government office to the south side. His daughter was still giggling and crawling over. The entire mats of the government hall were wiped by her petite body. Who said that? Don't old people say that 3 years old can tell one's age? There is not much difference between 3 years old and 3 months old. Anyway, your daughter's character is not gentle and virtuous. Qiguanrang usually liked to keep a straight face, and even looked at people with dark eyes. However, when he played with Chongqing, he showed some gentleness and pampering. This was seen by an acquaintance. How could he not find it rare? Feng Jin almost broke the brush in his hand. What did he mean by his daughter's character was not gentle and virtuous? Which woman of the Feng family was not educated, gentle, virtuous, intelligent, and beautiful? Qiguanrang did not tease Chongqing anymore. He let her grab his sleeve and climb on top of him, wiping his sleeve with her saliva. Come, you must be tired. Let uncle hug you and rest. He did not mind the dirt. He picked up the giggling Chongqing and found a comfortable position for her. He said nonchalantly, in today's world, it's not wrong for a woman to be stronger. Do you still remember reading the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women? That's what they look like when they're too gentle and virtuous. Feng Jin was taken aback. He was rendered speechless by Qiguanrang's words. I hope that my daughter can be as active and lively as Chongqing. When she grows up, I'll hire a martial arts teacher for her. Who knew when the world would calm down? The daughter that he had raised with his own hands was the apple of his eye. He could not bear to hurt her at all. For example, Huayu, when Chongqing was bothering you, didn't you still secretly bring her in your sleeve? However, when a woman grows up, she has to get married and have children. This is the way of reproduction, as well as the natural order of things. As a father, how many years could he accompany her? Children should walk their own paths in the future. If they were stronger and braver, they would get hurt less in the future. Don't you agree, little Chongqing? Chongqing did not understand these words, but she knew that Qiguanrang was talking to her, so she giggled. Feng Jin was silent for a long time. After a while he said, Isn't it still early? 16 years at most. Qiguanrang's face was sullen. He pursed his lips. How old was sister-in-law when you married her? Feng Jin was suddenly speechless. He was in a terrible mood. He did not know if it was because he felt that his daughter was too short by his side, or because of Qiguanrang's words. Hey, Xiaoyu, why aren't you saying anything today? Qiguanrang sat on the ground and teased Chongqing. Suka happened to walk past him. Suka sneered. I don't have a daughter. Asking a man who did not even have a daughter to participate in such a sad topic, was he trying to stab his heart? Qiguanrang secretly pursed his lips. Chongqing, who was in his arms, giggled and wanted to stand up. Then she pulled his hair crown. Which family's child is this? Jiang Pengji was dressed in a short brown shirt and had a windproof cloak draped over her shoulders. She looked like she had just come out of the carpentry workshop. As soon as she entered the door, she saw Qiguanrang sitting on the ground holding a fair and tender baby. She could not tell that this guy had the potential to be a nanny. Judging by her appearance, she's from Huayu's family? Qiguanrang held Chongqing and bowed slightly. My lord, This is Chongqing from Huayu's family. Chongqing did not care who came. She grabbed his hair crown and did not let go. She screamed and prepared to exert force. After a while, a pair of strong lean hands grabbed her under her armpits and lifted her up. But she was still holding on to the man's hair, and her two chubby paws refused to let go. They were in a silent stalemate. Qiguanrang reluctantly took off the hair crown and stuffed it into his sleeve. She would not be able to grab it this way. It's quite heavy. Jiang Pengji held the child in her arms and weighed him. He was much heavier than other children of the same age. Feng Jin's face darkened. Chongqing, don't mess with the Lord. Come to Daddy. If Chongqing messed with Qiguanrang, he could still remain calm. If she messed with Jiang Pengji, it would not do according to the hierarchy. Don't be so serious. Chongqing and I are quite fated. I was the one who named her. Jiang Pengji teased Chongqing and pinched her bones. She was indeed a very strong baby. Feng Jin looked at her nervously for a while. When he saw that Chongqing did not cry, he slowly felt relieved. Jiang Pengji pinched Chongqing's chubby face. Looking at this girl, I feel that there will be a joyous occasion today. Qiguanrang smiled and said, That's strange. This child was very noisy and lively before. Why is she so obedient when she's with the Lord? Jiang Pengji was not surprised. There was a slight smile on her face. It's normal. Children are very sensitive to auras. A child's perception of auras was incomparable to an adult's. Chongqing dared to mess with Qiguanrang, but she did not dare to mess with Jiang Pengji. This was the survival instinct that small animals were born with. Tian Zizai Xiuxian, streamer, was this child born in the earthquake? Ren Xiandao. Wow, Xiaobei looks so cute. She's chubby and has nice facial features. Daily Huanbu Kingshan. Look at who Chongqing's parents are. The parents have good genes, so the child can't be too bad. Jiang Pengji was distracted as she glanced at the bullet screen. Her cheeks were flushed with a milky fragrance. Pop! Jiang Pengji turned her head to look. Little Chongqing was giggling. Her adorable appearance had captured a large number of fans. Naughty! Jiang Pengji gently tapped the tip of her nose. Chongqing did not understand. She hugged her finger and wanted to stuff it into her mouth. Ah woo! Jiang Pengji's fingertips touched her teeth. She wanted to pull her finger out. At that moment, heavy footsteps came from outside. Meng Hun knelt outside the door and panted. My lord, there are nearly 20,000 troops and horses 20 miles outside the city. Their intentions are unknown. The atmosphere at the scene froze. Subconsciously, Feng Jin looked nervously at Jiang Pengji and Chongqing in her arms. All the muscles in his body were ready to move, as if he wanted to catch something. Jiang Pengji frowned. She lowered her head and gently pulled her finger out. She kissed the little girl's forehead in a comforting manner. Chapter 449. A child's perception of the surrounding aura was the most acute. Chongqing's watery eyes were wide open, not understanding what was happening. Jiang Pengji stroked Chongqing's fluffy hair and said softly, Huayu, don't be so nervous. Don't scare Chongqing. Feng Jin secretly heaved a sigh of relief, but he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How could he not be worried? When Chongqing was just born, she coincidentally encountered the earthquake in Dongqing. Now that she had just met the Lord, an unknown army of 20,000 men and horses arrived outside the city. Although Xiangyang district was not considered to be in a bad state now and all kinds of defensive equipment were prepared, a disaster of war was never a good thing. He was really afraid that his daughter would be misunderstood. How could he not be worried? It might not be a bad thing. Let's go and take a look first. She teased Chongqing to make sure that she did not scare the little girl. Then she returned Chongqing to Feng Jin. Jiang Pengji casually pulled the cloak that was placed at the side, unfolded it, and neatly put it on. Let's go. Feng Jin pursed his lips and stood on the spot. His gaze was complicated. Qiguanrang was slightly slower. He whispered to him, My lord is not a reckless and brainless person. I know. After all, we've known each other for many years. Lanting is trustworthy. Feng Jin also lowered his voice and used his wide sleeves to cover Chongqing. To be honest, when Meng Hun came over to report the news, he really felt that he was about to stop breathing. He was afraid that Jiang Pengji could not suppress her emotions and Chongqing in her arms would be the one to suffer. Feng Jin did not dare to imagine. Fortunately, she was better than he imagined. She was more restrained, more courageous, and more broad-minded. At that moment, Feng Jin almost had the urge to cry. He kissed the innocent Chongqing and felt a sense of relief after escaping a disaster. Being kissed by her own father, Chongqing giggled. She kicked her feet, stretched her neck, and kissed his cheek. Qiguan Rang and Feng Jin left the government office one after another. Jiang Pengji's figure was already nowhere to be seen. Time was tight. She had already galloped out of the city on her horse. The sirens sounded in Xiangyang district. The people packed up their stalls and hid in their houses. The streets were already empty. Feng Jin and Qiguan Rang took a while to climb the city gate. Jiang Pengji stood behind the wall with a solemn expression. Xueqi was not much earlier than them and was panting. Who are those people? Could it be the Xueqi army again? Xueqi panted, his face sweating profusely. The messenger half knelt on the ground and said respectfully, "According to the scouts at the front, the enemy has about 2,000 cavalry archers and 5,000 elite infantrymen. Moreover, the enemy is fully armored and well-equipped. As for the others, because they were too far away, we still don't know the specific situation." Jiang Pengji placed one hand on her waist and the other on her eyebrows. She stared at him for a long time without making a sound. Xueqi asked, "Master, should we send someone to investigate again?" Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue softly. She turned her head and realized that the three strategists had arrived, as well as a burden. Feng Jin was worried about leaving the child in the government office. He covered Chongqing with 2 wide sleeves to prevent her from being exposed to the wind. It wasn't just the 3 of them. The viewers in the live broadcast room were also on high alert. They felt like they were going to fight again today. Jin Tian Kang Wujing. How long has it been peaceful? Those bastards from the Xueqi army are looking for trouble again? I must wipe out the debt. Oh my God, I'm a little afraid of blood. People die in war. Should I quit the live broadcast room first? Xianggu Lei Meng. I had nightmares for a few days when I watched the streamer attack Xiangyang district and kill General Zhou of the Xueqi army. Don't bully her. A war is about to break out. Children, retreat quickly. Jiang Pengji looked at them and raised her eyebrows. What were they talking about? Why are all of you here? And why you? The wind is strong on the city wall. Aren't you afraid that Chongqing will catch a cold? Her father was so broad-minded. It was definitely the credit of his virtuous wife Jingxian that Chongqing could be raised to be so fair and plump. Master. This. Feng Jin understood Jiang Pengji. Her expression didn't have the sternness before the war at all. Instead she looked relaxed, which was strange. I don't know where the troops are from, but they shouldn't be coming for us. The alarm is temporarily cancelled. Jiang Pengji had fought in wars for many years in her previous life. Her battle experience was richer than the few beside her. Her mental brain domain had basically recovered. She was extremely sensitive to qi. Naturally, she could see that there was no murderous aura on the troops' horses. If they had come to attack Xiangyang district, their murderous aura would have soared to the sky. You're still too young. She clicked her tongue. Send someone down to ask him why he's here. Lao Siji Lianming, as expected, I should have trusted the streamer. Her expression was normal, so she was definitely fine. Jin Tian Fan Fa Phi. I was scared to death. I felt like my heart was in my throat. Even though the host was in another dimension, they didn't like killing. It was best to avoid a confrontation. When 2 soldiers fight, they don't kill the envoys. Just ask them why they're here. They won't kill anyone. Jiang Pengji spoke calmly. Her expression was calm. Her dark eyes were filled with inspiring absolute confidence. Although, I think this is nonsense. War is war. Death is death. What's the use of so many superficial etiquettes? Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue. She despised the so-called rules of the battlefield. In her world, if one was in a bad mood, they would start a war. Who would inform the enemy before a sneak attack? The 3 of them didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At that moment, Chongqing, who had been quiet all along, giggled. Feng Jin's face darkened. The wind on the city wall was too strong. It blew up Feng Jin's sleeves and tickled her. Jiang Pengji simply took off her cloak and folded it to cover Feng Jin's shoulders. It covered Chongqing, who was in his arms. "Thank you, my lord." Jiang Pengji glanced at him. "You talk too much nonsense." The wait was long. After a long time, the person she sent out returned. At the same time, he brought along a man who was about 40 years old. His sideburns were a little gray. He looked clean and upright. His facial features were more defined than the men from the Central Plains. His eyes were not pure black. Instead, they were a light brown. The man stopped 10 steps away. He looked Jiang Pengji up and down. Tears were brewing in his eyes. As if he had confirmed something, the man folded his sleeves and bowed. "Your servant Xueqi pays his respects to the young master." At that moment, not only were Feng Jin and the others dumbfounded, but the audience in the streaming room was speechless. Even Jiang Pengji was stunned. What was going on? Jiang Pengji said, "Old sir, let's talk things out." "What are you doing?" Although she said that, she had some guesses in her heart. The man called himself Xueqi and called her young master. Could he be the old man who used to serve her mother? When she thought of the large army of nearly 20,000 people outside the city, her heart skipped a beat. Intense joy surged in her heart. Chapter 450. "Young master, you're flattering me." The person in front of him was the shopkeeper of the treasure house in the northern borderline. He had long been freed from his slave status, but in front of Gu Min's only descendant, he still addressed himself as an old servant. This was his respect for Jiang Pengji and his nostalgia for Gu Min. It's been more than 10 years. Young master is already so grown up. If the old master knew, how happy she would be. Others valued boys more than girls, but the old master prayed everywhere when she was pregnant, hoping that God would bestow her a daughter. Xueqi had collected many female guanyin for Gu Min. He had a deep understanding of Gu Min's obsession. Now that he saw that Gu Min's daughter had grown up to be a dashing beauty, he had no regrets in this life. No, wait a minute. What was dashing beauty? Xueqi looked at Jiang Pengji with a conflicted expression and did not speak for a long time. Jiang Pengji gazed at the troops outside the city. "Are you really my old servant?" Xueqi understood and said, "Young master, don't misunderstand. Those are the people I borrowed from Magistrate Liu. It's not easy to do business in times of peace, let alone in this chaotic world. In order to deliver your things safely, I borrowed some troops from Master Liu. I didn't expect to cause misunderstandings." Jiang Pengji could not help but smile slightly and said, "Thank you. How should I address you?" Not to mention Xueqi's age and qualifications, just by looking at his clothes and bearing, he was not an ordinary person. Jiang Pengji would not really treat him as a servant just because he called himself an old servant. In terms of age, Jiang Pengji's age in her previous life plus her age in this life could be considered Xueqi's age after rounding it up. Xueqi thought for a while and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "If you don't mind, you can call me Uncle Gu." Uncle Gu. Jiang Pengji readily agreed. Xueqi seemed to be recalling something. His eyes were filled with red veins, but he happily responded, "Sigh." The three of them and the audience in the streaming room were still in a state of confusion. They did not understand how the situation suddenly took such a big turn. It was not until the two finished talking that they understood one by one and felt relieved. It would be best if there was no need to fight. This Xueqi seemed to be acquainted with the Lord, streamer, so he might even bring something good with him. Jiang Pengji guessed what Xueqi had sent over. She smiled as she took Chongqing from Feng Jin's arms and kissed the little girl's forehead. Lucky star. Chongqing's eyes widened in confusion. She cried out and struggled to return the kiss. Little did she know that this action of hers had caused a huge misunderstanding to Xueqi. He looked at Chongqing, who was giggling, and Jiang Pengji in shock. Then he glared at Feng Jin. "Take her away." It's easy to catch a cold on the city wall due to the strong wind. It's not easy to treat a sick child. Chongqing was returned to Feng Jin along with the cloak that she used to shelter her from the wind. The little girl looked aggrieved. The police report in Xiangyang district had been lifted. Not only did the person who came not cause trouble for her, but he also gave her money, food, and horses. Xueqi was a serious and rigorous person. He temporarily put aside his inner conflict and slightly lagged behind. He followed Zhang Pengji down the city wall. As he walked, he reported the items that he had brought over clearly. He even clearly stated the number of items that he had used during the journey. He even made a list. He did things openly, allowing others to see his sincerity at a glance. Hearing the arrangements for the sheepskin and horses, Feng Jin and the rest looked at him with admiration. They were not lacking in food now. The items that Xueqi had sent had really solved their urgent need. Due to the people who had migrated from Shangjing and Fengyi, plus the thousands of members of the Qingyi army who had been captured, the people in Xiangyang district had more people than before the earthquake. Winter in the north of Dongqing had always been very cold. There was not enough clothing in the city to keep out the cold. Xueqi was still worried about how to get through the winter. He did not expect Xueqi to send sheepskin over. He had sent over 10,000 sheepskin that had already been tanned. If these sheepskins were to be purchased in Dongqing, the price would not be cheap. It was estimated that they would not be able to purchase so many sheepskins. Not only that, the wool of the sheep reared in Dongqing was short and sparse. The wool that Xueqi had sent was long and dense. A sheepskin was very heavy to hold in one's hand. However, how could such sheepskin be made into clothing to keep out the cold? Zhang Pengji frowned as she thought of a solution. The audience in the streaming room was also racking their brains. Ha 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 ha. Why don't we just cut the wool to a suitable length? Gaofi finally arrives. It's not a problem to cut it, but look at how thick the wool is. It feels like the owner of the sheepskin has never had his wool trimmed since he was born until he was slaughtered. What about the wool that was cut to a suitable length? It's not good to waste it. Xueqi, let's recycle the wool that was cut. Wash it and stuff it into the lining of the clothes as cotton. Everyone could not help but think of the method of using down jackets. It seemed like it was not impossible. Zhang Pengji felt that there was another use for it. She used to visit the largest history museum in the Federation. She once saw a type of clothing called sweater. It was a scarf made of thread. According to the introduction at that time, there seemed to be wool in it. She just did not know how to turn the wool into thread and weave it. If there was no audience in the streaming room, Zhang Pengji would probably have to experiment for a while. If the experiment failed, she could only ask someone to wash the wool, comb it, and then sew it into the lining of the clothes to keep warm. But now that there was an audience, she only needed to ask. Everyone would work together to think of a solution. Thus, Zhang Pengji asked about the sweater and the scarf. She was a little worried. What if these things did not exist in the era of the streaming room? In the end, not only did the audience in the streaming room know about it, but they also sent a wave of flowers to Zhang Pengji. Tian Tian Ziyang Duanging. Bring a small stool here and watch the streamer knit and knit. Ha ha ha, the scene is so beautiful. How Xiang faking death. I think Feng Jin and the rest are really going crazy. Streamer. Can you have some pity on them? When they work overtime, the streamer plays with mud. When they continue to work overtime, the streamer plays with wood. When they work overtime and are about to collapse, the streamer goes to knit and knit. I feel that if there were forums in this era, they might secretly post a thread to complain about the streamer. I have even thought of the topic. 818, the Zhangbapi who does not do proper work, doesn't pay, and has a bad character. Shanxian Shaoxiang. Ha ha ha, what the hell is Zhangbapi? I laugh so hard that my stomach hurts. Wushang Kachao. Don't you make it? It's the nickname given to the streamer's fan club by the young Feng Jin. Back then, the name of the streamer's fan club was Goddess, Her Majesty, and other lofty titles. However, ever since Zhang Pengji conquered Xiangyang district, the entire image changed. Zhang Pengji brainlessly squeezed Feng Jin and the rest of their labor and made them work overtime. After a few months without paying them, the official nickname of her fan club became Zhang Bapi. Chapter 451. She seriously asked the audience in the streaming room for advice. Although they laughed, they were still very enthusiastic. It didn't take long for Zhang Pengji to get a lot of text tutorials. Not only was there hand spinning teaching you to weave wool into yarn, but there was also 100 ways to knit wool. It was easy to say but difficult to do. There were many details involved, and the audience in the streaming room couldn't answer them. Zhang Pengji could only try according to the text guide or ask Xueqi. The other party was also shocked by her imagination. Who would think of spinning wool into yarn and then using the yarn to make warm clothes? Although her imagination was a little strange, Xueqi gave it a positive answer after thinking about it seriously. Wool was definitely warm. If her imagination came true, it might open up a new industry. He had a hunch that there must be a huge business opportunity in it. Zhang Pengji was definitely a person of action. Since she had an idea, she naturally had to put it into action. Go and recruit some skilled and experienced embroidery maids. They will be paid daily and their meals will be provided. Zhang Pengji had money now, which was reflected in the fact that she could give daily wages to the temporary workers she recruited. As soon as the news was sent out, many women came to apply for the job. Building houses, repairing roads, and reclaiming wasteland urgently required a lot of manpower, and it didn't matter if they were men or women. Many men and healthy women worked hard every day in order to earn money and support their families. However, this job required physical strength, which was only suitable for healthy young men and women. There were also some elderly women or women who were not in good health who could not go out to work, so they were a burden to their families. Now that they heard that the county government was looking for skilled and experienced embroidery maids who could provide 3 meals a day and a generous salary, these elderly women also eagerly came to apply for the job. Zhang Pengji didn't recruit too many at first. She only chose 50 honest female workers. Shearing, washing, removing fat, soaking, drying. The first few steps were done step by step according to the tutorial. It wasn't difficult. The female workers were puzzled. This had nothing to do with their skills, but Zhang Pengji provided their meals and paid them 40 cents a day. They didn't say much. After finishing these tasks, Zhang Pengji worked hard in the blacksmith shop for 2 days and made a few wool brushes. Xueqi looked at his little boss going up and down, and suddenly had the illusion that time had turned back, that his old boss was still alive. Recalling the past, in order to start a paper mill, his old employer had also neglected sleep and food like this. The combed wool was spun into a long thread with a mallet, and then the strands were combined to increase tenacity. Zhang Pengji's hands-on ability was not bad, and the wool she made was also decent. Needless to say, the female workers who worked hard seemed to have a certain degree of obsessive-compulsive disorder. They had to make the wool to be of equal thickness. After experimenting for a while, they had basically gotten used to it. With 50 people working together, the efficiency had greatly increased. In just a few days, he had accumulated hundreds of wool balls. When the female workers heard that the district magistrate wanted to weave clothes with the fur balls, they muttered to themselves while Zhang Pengji was not around. My goodness, how are we going to make clothes with such thick embroidery threads? Could it be used to repair it? A female worker giggled and sat on a small stool, her hands skillfully brushing the wool. A thread is thicker than the holes on the clothes. How do you sew it? Someone else said, who knows? Don't be fooled by our district magistrate's young age. He has a lot of ideas in his mind. Since he paid for people to work for him, he must have his reasons. If you are so curious, go ask the district magistrate yourself. Why are you staying here and talking so much? Which noble likes a talkative servant? If you don't want to do this job, there are plenty of people who want to do it. The female worker felt a little guilty. It's just a private conversation. It won't reach the district magistrate's ears. What was Zhang Pengji doing at that moment? She was studying all kinds of knitting patterns and reporting to the government office every day. When Feng Jin and the others looked up, they could see her competing with 2 wooden needles and a ball of wool. They could not help but secretly facepalm. This kind of lord was really doomed. She was holding 2 long wooden needles in her hands, and on the table in front of her was a bamboo booklet with densely written words. She looked serious and serious. However, if someone could see the bullet screen in the streaming room, they would probably not think so. Chuebo. Ha ha ha, trash streamer, finally there is something you don't know. Jojo Ma Chuanzi. #rubbing face. Streamer, why are you so stubborn? Just throw the booklet to the female workers and let them study it. There are specializations in this field. Knitting is a science and an art. Although it is quite simple, it really requires a little talent. I watched you knit for more than 2 hours. I can't wait to climb into the screen and hold your hands to teach you how to knit step by step. Really, they would rather see Zhang Pengji play with mud. Chen Chao Durian Piao. Ha ha ha, the person above, don't be so honest. I want to see the streamer knit the sweater. The audience in the streaming room laughed mercilessly. Zhang Pengji frowned and threw the wooden needles on the table with 2 clangs. Rang secretly curled his lips and quietly looked away to avoid being caught by Zhang Pengji. Because Xueqi had sent a large amount of grain, horses and sheepskin, these things had to be accounted for and stored in the warehouse one by one. Rang and the others were busy with this, reliving the pain of working overtime to death. However, their lord did not take pity on her subordinates. She held 2 wooden needles and a ball of wool in her hands and did not know what she was doing. Once she reached a bottleneck, she would throw a tantrum and throw things. It was infuriating to compare oneself to others. Otherwise, why did he have to work overtime when she was the lord? At that moment, Li Yun, who had gone to the neighboring Chengde County to purchase fine breeds, returned. He was still wearing a slightly worn-out brown short shirt, revealing his muscular arms. Both of his feet were washed clean. His trousers were pulled up to his knees, revealing his strong and explosive calves. Li Yun's appearance diverted the attention of a portion of the fans. Zhang Pengji glanced at Li Yun, then looked at the wooden needles and wool on the table. Without waiting for Li Yun to bow, she waved at him. Han Mei, come here. I have an important task for you. Can you complete it successfully? Suddenly, the 3 of them and the audience in the streaming room had an ominous premonition. Wait a minute. Rang widened his eyes in astonishment. He watched helplessly as Li Yun revealed a naive and passionate smile. I will do my best to complete the task entrusted to me by my lord. Zhang Pengji nodded her head, her expression solemn, as if what she had to say was very important. It will be the autumn harvest in a month's time. The weather is getting colder by the day. What's worrying is that the people in the district have yet to prepare their winter clothing. In order for the people to wear warm clothing, I happen to find a knitting technique. However, my hands are not nimble and I have yet to study it thoroughly. In addition, there are other things that I have to attend to, so I am unable to attend to them. Take a good look at it and study it. If this technique can be reproduced, I don't know how many people will benefit from it. You must treat it seriously so that you do not disappoint the people's high hopes. The 3 of them were speechless. Chapter 452. Li Yun was wondering what it was about, but when he heard that it was to help the people get through the winter, it was a matter of great importance. His heart warmed up, and he immediately agreed. Looking at his expression, no one doubted that if he was asked to issue a military order, he might really do it. Dalarodo Duoya. Damn! Trash streamer. Kufugwo, you asked Li Yun to farm before, and now you want him to knit a sweater. That's enough of you. Let Wahuanqingge, trash streamer +1, let go of that guy, let me do it. He, trash streamer +2, don't run after work if you have the guts. Let's go to the rooftop and learn from each other. Doesn't the streamer's conscience hurt to bully the innocent Li Yun? How did you come up with the idea of asking Li Yun to knit a sweater while holding a gun with both hands? Zhang Pengji was indifferent to the attacks, and she even shamelessly posted a bullet screen. Streamer V, I'm doing more work for the capable, how am I bullying him? Then, the bullet screen was filled with a stream of bah, clearly expressing their disdain and despise for Zhang Pengji. It was proven that Li Yun's hands-on ability was much stronger than Zhang Pengji's. He carefully looked at the most basic knitting pattern, then he hugged the ball of wool and studied it for a long time. At first, he was stuttering, but after he became familiar with it, he knitted it neatly. After a while, he knitted a small section, which was about the length of a pinky finger. This is amazing, so it can be done this way. Li Yun looked at the crisscrossed wool thread in surprise. His interest was piqued, and he hurriedly studied other slightly more complicated patterns. If I knit them together, it will be soft and thick, and it will feel warmer than 10 layers of linen. This time, it was Zhang Pengji's turn to be speechless. Feng Jin and the others curiously went forward and pinched it with their fingers. It was indeed very soft and thick, but they did not know how warm it was. But, based on this knitting speed, I don't know how long it will take to make a shirt. The efficiency was too slow. Feng Jin was a little annoyed. Zhang Pengji rolled her eyes and took out a simple drawing of a piece of bamboo paper. He spread it out in front of everyone and said in a deep voice, "Do you really think you're going to use wool to weave a set of clothes that you're wearing? Not to mention anything else. Just the 2 sleeves were extremely heavy. How was he supposed to wear them? I just knit a close-fitting piece of clothing, like this." She did not choose the modern sweater design given by the audience in the live broadcast room. Instead, She chose a design that was more acceptable to Feng Jin and the others. However, the wide sleeves became narrow sleeves, and the lapels were slightly modified. The trousers were more tan. On the whole, it didn't exceed the range of people's acceptance. It was just that the material was replaced with wool. My lord is truly deft and deft. Li Yun did not conceal his compliments. He thought that all lords should do nothing, be high and mighty all day long, and be above the common people. After getting to know Jiang Pengji, he felt that this kind of lord was not bad. She was amiable and approachable, worried about the people, and thought about them every day. This was probably the wise ruler that her master often talked about. Where else could he find such a good lord? I think so too. Do your best. Jiang Pengji patted Li Yun's shoulder, and he agreed heroically. In less than 2 days, Li Yun knitted a set of clothes for Feng Jin's Chongqing. Feng Jin was speechless. Li Yun's skill at knitting sweaters was similar to his skill at farming. He improved rapidly. In just a day or two, he had knitted a few simple patterns for Chongqing. The young lady was delighted after she wore it. She crawled all over the place happily. However, the clothes were too warm. She couldn't stand it and wanted to take them off. It's indeed very warm. Feng Jin felt the temperature inside the clothes. Quickly put some clothes on Chongqing. Don't let her catch a cold. Li Yun said with some disappointment, it's a pity that the speed of making clothes isn't fast. Feng Jin shook his head and denied it. You're wrong. This speed is already quite shocking. Hunmei, do you know how clothes are made? From the silk spun by silkworms to weave into cloth, and then the cloth into clothes, who knows how many processes and manpower are involved in the process. Even the sackcloth worn by the common people also costs a lot. This kind of woolen clothes can be said to be made very quickly. Li Yun understood what Feng Jin meant, and his face revealed a joyful expression. They could raise sheep that grew wool quickly. The sheared wool could be made into wool and then knitted into sweaters. The time taken was much shorter than cloth. Although this kind of thick clothes could only be worn during the cold season, weren't the people lacking clothes that could keep them warm? Ordinary sackcloth couldn't keep them warm. The weather in the north of Dongqing was extremely cold. How many people died from the cold? If this kind of woolen clothes could be popularized, how many people could be saved in one winter? The more he thought about it, the more excited Li Yun became. My lord is really a very kind person. He tried hard to suppress the excitement on his face and clenched his fists tightly. Feng Jin laughed in his heart. He didn't deny his lord's talent, but to say that she was a very kind person? He had reservations about this description. Li Yun in front of him was also an interesting person. His lord tricked him like this, but he could still find something to entertain himself. It was the standard case of being sold and still foolishly giving money to the seller. After Feng Jin's guidance, Li Yun was even more motivated. He almost spent the whole night researching. Every day, he mastered 1 or 2 patterns and taught them to the female workers. The female workers were also very good at learning. Another advantage of the sweater was that it could be knitted into several parts. As long as the number of stitches was controlled and the parts were knitted, they could be pieced together to form a complete sweater. Xueqi stayed in Xiangyang district for half a month. There were 3 sets of ready-made clothes in front of him. Just touching them made him feel warm. If he were to dye the wool, he would be able to come up with more patterns. Xueqi was a businessman. He quickly thought of the key point. However, this business couldn't be popularized outside of Xiangyang district. It couldn't be brought to the northern borderline. Don't worry, young master. I will think of a way to buy more sheepskin and send someone to send it over. Herding was prevalent in the northern borderline. Every household had a mountain of wool. They didn't know how to deal with it. Some people even used the sheepskin as fuel. If they bought it in bulk, it wouldn't cost much. If it was left in the northern borderline, it was just waste. If it was transported to Xiangyang district, it could be processed into various kinds of wool products to keep warm in winter. Who knew how many people could be saved? When Xueqi thought of this, his impression of Jiang Pengji rose by several levels. Then I'll have to trouble Uncle Gu. Jiang Pengji didn't stand on ceremony. After this winter, she planned to mobilize her troops to Fengyi County after the spring plowing. She had been unhappy with the Tsing-Yi army there for a long time. It was time to expand her territory. Oh yes, when Uncle Gu returns, Can you do me a favor and pass something to my father? Jiang Pengji left the knitting work to Li Yun. She finished developing a portion of the siege weapons. She had nothing to do for the rest of the time. She might as well follow the wishes of the live streaming room's viewers and work on food for the winter. Chapter 453. What's the best thing to eat at a winter gathering? Many viewers had their own opinions on this question, but most of the answers were hot pot and barbecue. Tian Wuging, streamer, don't be careless and let the ancient people see the charm of modern hot pot. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and searched Lu Shi's memory. She poured cold water on the viewer. Host V, if the hot pot you're talking about is warming the cauldron, I think it's better for you to give up on this idea. Many viewers were confused. They didn't understand what Jiang Pengji meant. Some viewers went to search on Baidu and found out that the so-called warming the cauldron was actually the ancient version of hot pot. It could be traced back to the Shang and Zhou dynasties, but there weren't complicated soup bases and seasonings in ancient times, so the hot pot wasn't tasty enough. Although the streamer's space and their history were different, some historical developments still had similarities. Heshibazeo. #rested my chin. I'm so depressed. I thought I could conquer the taste buds of the ancient people with hot pot. Jiang Pengji smiled and sent a bullet screen. Host V, you can teach me how to make soup bases and sauces. I can conquer their taste buds just the same. The shopping center attached to the system was rubbish. There were pitifully few items on sale. It sold almost everything that was cheap. Jiang Pengji searched the shopping center and found many cheap seasonings, such as salt, sugar, MSG, and white vinegar. There were also single plants that could be used as seasonings when dried, such as pepper, dried ginger, chili, anise. She confirmed with the audience that these were cheap. However, some of them grew in barbarian lands or other continents and hadn't entered the Central Plains yet. Given the different situations in the two worlds, they didn't dare to be too confident. Anyway, they could be used as seasonings. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue and said in her heart, it's rare that your shopping center can gather so many things. Although it was just a small store, it was still a good thing for her to eat. The system, which was forcibly imprisoned by Jiang Pengji, couldn't help but snort coldly when it heard her complaints. Although it was imprisoned, the system didn't show any signs of nervousness or begging for mercy. Compared to the system, the lifespan of humans was too short. She couldn't live more than 100 years. When she died, could her soul resist the capture of the system? It said coldly, you humans are really greedy and filthy creatures. After experiencing so many hosts, the system had long seen through the nature of human greed and shamelessness. It could only be said that it was too careless to be defeated by Jiang Pengji this time. This was one of the few times the system had spoken since Jiang Pengji had imprisoned it. Jiang Pengji secretly raised her eyebrows and said frankly, selfishness and greed are the unique qualities of intelligent creatures. To some extent, they are the necessary factors to promote the development of civilization. You say that humans are greedy, but why don't you look at yourself? It's as if you're so pure and kind. You're so stupid, yet you blame your enemy for being smart. You're so funny. The system seemed to have been poked in its weak spot. Its voice lost its usual calmness, and it said sarcastically, I gave the host a new life, and when she was alive, she could do whatever she wanted. So when she died, wouldn't the things she left behind be my reward? It was just a fair trade. Don't be a whore and still want to maintain a chastity. There is no free lunch in this world. He couldn't suppress the greed in his heart. He didn't work hard, so he wanted to rely on the system to obtain all sorts of things. Fame, looks, wealth, lovers. Why? How could a stupid and ordinary person in his previous life be able to live like a star after being reborn? There is a reward for being famous for a lifetime. Jiang Pengji blinked and softly said, oh, in her heart. What you said makes sense, but what does this have to do with me? The system choked. This really had nothing to do with Jiang Pengji. It was just repressed for a long time and wanted to complain. After a while, it heard Jiang Pengji say, I don't really agree with what you said. First, a fair trade is based on mutual transparency. Did you tell your host that if she eats something from you, she has to pay with her soul? Second, not everyone wants to be reborn like me. I was so famous in my previous life. Who asked you to come and resurrect me? How shameless. Third, Do you dare to touch your own conscience and say that you chose the host only for her soul? The system did not say anything. Zhang Pengji secretly rolled her eyes. A rookie was a rookie. He didn't have any skills, yet he dared to show off in front of her. If the system was really for the soul, why would it go through so much effort to resurrect the host, let the host exploit her for a lifetime, and then harvest her soul? According to Zhang Pengji's guess, the soul was just the last bit of value of the host. The system would not let go of it and squeeze it dry. After all, no matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. As for the real benefit, it should be something else, such as popularity points, or something else. Zhang Pengji secretly thought in her heart. Unfortunately, she did not have enough clues. The system was playing dead again. TSK. Stupid data. Zhang Pengji muttered to herself. She recorded a few recipes for the soup base and a few methods of making sauces according to the audience in the streaming room. These were not secret recipes. If one were to look them up sincerely, they could be found on the internet. Zhang Pengji was not ungrateful for the help of the audience. Naturally, she felt touched. Xueqi. Something good happened. I feel that the streamer suddenly laughed while copying. It's so weird. I suddenly thought of a very interesting guy. He obviously has low IQ, but he always provokes me. What do you think this is called? Wu Li Wu Bian. Retarded? Smart. Zhang Pengji gave this amazing reply 101 points. She was not afraid that he would become arrogant even if she gave him one more point. She put the soup recipes and the sauces recipes on the stove to dry, then folded them and put them away. I think I can open a warming cauldron shop. Maybe it's a chain, Tumi Dalao. Ha ha ha, streamer, please don't do that. Otherwise, the strategists in your house will cry at Lei Feng Tower. The Lord played with mud, wood, and knitting. She was already not engaged in proper work. If she opened a hot pot restaurant. TSK. Just thinking about that scene made the audience in the streaming room feel distressed. Why was it so difficult to meet a reliable lord in this day and age? With the soup and sauces recipes for the hot pot, she could also gather all the necessary ingredients. Now, she only lacked the equipment needed for the hot pot and barbecue. Zhang Pengji studied the current warming cauldrons, the yuanyang pots of the audience in the streaming room, and the antique literature that she knew. She made a design overnight and went to the brick kiln to talk to the craftsman for the whole day. Seeing that Zhang Pengji was not coming to the government office again, Feng Jin and the other two did not know whether they should feel lucky or have a headache. If the Lord stayed in the government office, it was most likely that she was not engaged in proper work. Just thinking about it gave them a headache. If the Lord did not stay in the government office, it was most likely that she was not engaged in proper work. Just thinking about it gave them a headache. Chapter 454. When Xueqi and his men left, not only did they bring a batch of glass tea sets and jewelry, but they also brought the gifts Zhang Pengji prepared for Lu Shi. The gifts were not precious, but they were thoughtful. For example, there were a few sets of sweaters and trousers to keep out the cold, a set of multi-purpose hot pot equipment, a set of equipment for barbecuing and roasting meat, and the soup and sauce recipes that she copied. When Xueqi saw these things, his expression became a little strange. If it weren't for the chaotic times, the young master would have become a merchant even more powerful than the old master. Not only would he have become the richest man in Dongqing, he could have even become the richest man in the 5 countries, and his business would have spread throughout the 9 prefectures and 4 seas. Unfortunately, the current world did not allow it. Thinking of this, Xueqi felt a little more pity for Zhang Pengji. Before he left, he asked a question that he really wanted to ask. That Feng Langjun. Is he a guest of the young master? Zhang Pengji looked at Xueqi's mysterious expression, and she almost choked on her saliva. No, why you and I are just friends. Best friends. We don't have that kind of relationship. Zhang Pengji answered decisively to prevent Xueqi from thinking too much. Then that young girl was not the young master's child? Xueqi asked. She said resolutely, no, it has nothing to do with me. Xueqi did not know if he was regretful or relieved, but he left Xiangyang district with complicated feelings. Because of the supplies Xueqi brought, the construction of the entire Xiangyang district took a big step forward. The whole city could see the prosperity of the future. It was rare for Zhang Pengji to restrain her idleness, and obediently handle affairs in the government office. Recently, the busiest thing was the distribution of improved seeds and the lease of land for the next year. Fortunately, Xueqi had already registered all the household registration, so the task was not very heavy. He would be free after working overtime for a while. The weather is getting colder. Seeing the leaves in the courtyard dyed with a faint yellow, he sighed slightly. It's like this every year, but this year is considered good. At least we are well prepared. Xueqi was used to seeing all kinds of tragedies since he was young. The current Xiangyang district was no different from heaven on earth to him. It was peaceful and quiet, full of vitality. This was something he rarely saw in his life, and he hoped that such a scene could be spread throughout the whole of China. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about something else. When winter comes, I'm afraid the people won't be able to work under the heavy snow. Many people in Xiangyang district rely on manual labor to obtain food. If there's no work in winter. Feng Jin paused at this point. We can't possibly ask the district headquarters to open the warehouse and release food, right? Those are the military rations for next year's spring plowing. We can't touch them at will. Feng Jin and the others knew that Jiang Pengji wanted to attack the Tsingyi army in Fengyi County. The number of recruited soldiers, including the original imperial guards and troops, had reached 8,000. As Xiangyang district had to seize the time to construct, from summer to late autumn, they had been helping out everywhere. They were so busy that they almost had no time to rest. After winter, the army's training would be really strict. Feng Jin felt a little annoyed. Which army didn't train in good weather? His lord just had to put the most important training in winter. But rationally, he could understand Jiang Pengji. Steel tempered the will, while ice and snow forged the military soul. Only a harsh environment could stimulate a person's potential to the fullest. Regarding this problem, Xueqi had discussed it with Jiang Pengji in private. She gave him a solution that made him speechless. Xueqi said, "My lord talked to Rang about this a few days ago. She said, it's cold in winter. Stay at home and knit sweaters." His expression was stiff. He imitated Jiang Pengji's indifferent tone very well. Feng Jin was speechless. There was nothing wrong with this. Before the beginning of autumn, all the houses in the residential area had been completed. From mid-September, the people moved into the new houses in batches. The area of the houses was about 50 square meters. One room for one household. Every 10 households counted as a courtyard. Of course, these houses were rented to the people. 150 copper coins a month. Even the poorest families could afford it. At the beginning of October, the district headquarters began to recruit female workers in large quantities. They set up a knitting workshop. The number of female workers expanded to 150. The knitting workshop's main task was to process wool and spin it into wool balls. In addition, the knitting workshop also allowed women with some skills to learn how to knit sweaters. The district headquarters could give a reward of 25 to 45 copper coins for knitting a specific size sweater and wool pants. If the sweater had patterns and was exquisitely knitted, there would be a reward ranging from 5 to 10 copper coins. Of course, if men also wanted to do this work, the district headquarters would be more than happy to accept. As for the wool balls and knitting needles needed to knit sweaters and wool pants, every household had to register with the knitting workshop with their real address, real name, and the names of their family members. They also had to leave a deposit of 50 copper coins. This news was undoubtedly great news for the commoners. Knitting sweaters was different from other manual labor. They could stay at home. Even on the coldest winter day, they didn't have to worry about not having any work to do. They could save up some money and live more comfortably next year. Women with exquisite craftsmanship could knit 2 sets of sweaters in about 3 days. They had nothing to do all day, so they squatted at home and knitted sweaters. Many men secretly learned from their wives in order to earn more money. The quality of the houses built by the district headquarters was very guaranteed. It was much better than most people's houses with leaky walls. The people had great confidence in the first winter after the earthquake. It was already November. The cold wind that blew brought with it a chill that hurt people's skin. Sweaters and wool pants were officially on the market. They cost 40 copper coins for children and 100 copper coins for adults. The price was not high, but most of the people were watching. Those who were generous enough to buy sweaters and wool pants were mostly those who had knitted before. Not to mention other things. Wearing it was really warm. Their whole body felt warm. They were not afraid of the cold wind at all by simply wearing a piece of clothing. In less than half a month, sweaters and wool pants were all the rage in the entire Xiangyang district. More and more sweaters were sold. Xueqi, the housekeeper, looked at the account book and almost cried. Sweaters and wool pants are a losing business. He carefully calculated the accounts. Every time he sold a set, he would lose 30 to 40 copper coins. Xiaoyu, you can't calculate it like this. Feng Jin pulled the circular scarf around his neck and smiled. You should also calculate how much the district headquarters will lose if the people freeze to death. If you calculate it this way, it's actually a big profit. The winter is hard to endure. Even in Shangjing, there are people who died from the snow and cold. It was a losing business. What Zhang Pengji wanted was people to survive. After entering the government office, Feng Jin hurriedly closed the door to block the wind from outside. Then he took off the circular scarf around his neck. If it was in the past, he would definitely wear a thick fox cloak over his head, making him look bloated. Chapter 455. There were only 4 people in the government office. Feng Jin, Qiguanrang, Xueqi, and Zhang Pengji, who had been slacking off. Other than Feng Jin's woolen goods, which were knitted by his wife, the others were begged. Yes, begged, but the target was a little strange. Knitting. Isn't it addictive? Xueqi forced a smile. To be honest, Li Yun also felt that knitting was addictive. The weather was cold, and there was no need to plow fields or run errands. The internal affairs were taken care of by the teachers. He had nothing to do after practicing his spear for 4 hours every day, so he hugged the ball of wool and knitted. But it was windy outside. How cold was it to knit? He thickened his skin and went to the government office to get some warm air. Qiguanrang teased that having a wife was better than not having one, complaining that Feng Jin always used the scarf knitted by his wife to provoke him. Then Li Yun, the honest child, sincerely offered to knit a suit for Qiguanrang. Qiguanrang was speechless. Xueqi laughed until his stomach hurt, then teased Li Yun. Hanmei helped Wenjing, why not Ku? Sure. Xueqi was speechless. He was just teasing the honest child. Li Yun's fingers were nimble, his knitting efficiency better than the most skilled woman. The knitted sweaters had patterns, neat stitches, and looked exquisite. In just a few days, Qiguanrang and Xueqi received the results of Li Yun's knitting. Both of them had mixed feelings. She was so virtuous she could be married. My lord, do you want to knit a suit? Li Yun's impression of Zhang Pengji had already gone off the charts several times. Remembering that she was also alone, he volunteered himself. But he was rejected. Zhang Pengji was too lazy to look up. No need, it's not like I'm unwanted. No one will even make a suit for me. What a joke, the ladies in the government office were fighting to make one for her. More importantly, I'm highly skilled in martial arts, there are few opponents in the world, I'm immune to heat and cold. I'm not like them, shivering like quails when they take off a piece of clothing. Zhang Pengji smiled wickedly, hitting the 3 strategists in the government office with her words. My lord, you're wrong. Although their physiques weren't as good as Meng Hun and the others, they weren't completely useless. Zhang Pengji glanced at them and said, Can you go out for a morning jog so early in the morning? The 3 of them were silent for a moment. If the blanket did not allow them to get up, they would not run. The wool from the north borderline was continuously sent to the Xiangyang district. In order not to arouse the suspicion of the north borderline and to avoid the fight between the Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus group, every batch of wool was transported on a different route. The knitted sweaters and trousers would not only be supplied to the people of Xiangyang district, the surplus would be sold to Chongzhou, where Lu Shi was from. Naturally, the price was not as cheap as here. It was at least 10 times more expensive. Chongzhou was much colder than Xiangyang district. However, at the beginning of the sale, not many sweaters and trousers were sold. The style was all right, but they had never seen the material before. However, the magistrate of Chongzhou, Lu Shi, was Zhang Pengji's father. His father personally recommended it, and the officials under him also bought a set of clothes. The moment they put it on, it was really warm, soft and comfortable. They were convinced by Lu Prefecture's governor's recommendation. Slowly, the market for the sweaters and trousers opened up, but the quantity was limited. Basically, they were sold out when they arrived in Chongzhou. Without any warning, the first snow of the year fell on the world. It was as big as a goose feather, and the sky and earth were the same color. It looked extremely beautiful. Jiang Pengji issued a decree in the district headquarters. Every household would be fined if the snow on their roof or in front of their door was more than an inch higher. Although most of the houses in the district are new houses, if there is too much snow, it will still cause the houses to collapse. In the land under my rule, I do not wish for the tragic scene of Shangjing's snow disaster to happen again. I hope that all the people in the district will be able to get through this winter in peace. Jiang Pengji's decree made many people complain, but the district headquarters had the final say in Xiangyang district. The people could choose not to implement it, but the district headquarters had the right to take back the rented houses and chase their entire family out. Faced with such a forceful implementation plan, the people could only swallow their complaints and obediently sweep the snow. Every courtyard was equipped with a ladder. Moreover, the houses were not tall, so sweeping the snow was not dangerous. Feng Jin looked at Jiang Pengji, who was becoming more and more beautiful, and said, "My lord, the people will understand your painstaking efforts." Jiang Pengji nodded and then said, "Don't be reserved, roast whatever you want to eat." In winter, having a hot pot and barbecue for a meal was the most exciting. In winter, the daily routine in the government office was basically having a meal and working overtime. As for when to have a meal, it depended on when she hunted for something big, or there would not be enough to eat. Jiang Pengji set up a charcoal grill, a barbecue plate, and a hot pot rack in the government office. The fuel was a pot of charcoal, and a few tables were put together. Whoever wanted to eat could roast whatever they wanted to eat. More than 10 kinds of seasonings were placed in different small glass plates to cater to each person's taste. There were no green vegetables in this season. The hot pot was filled with fungi, mushrooms, cured meat, or other game. Feng Jin looked at Jiang Pengji holding a brush, dipping it in the seasoning, and brushing it on the pheasant and chicken wings. He was completely at ease. With such a lord, what else could he say? Say that a gentleman should stay away from the kitchen? Looking at Meng Han and the others who were eager to try, he could not bear to spoil the atmosphere with his words. "Sigh, I'll just treat it as a party without so many rules." Feng Jin thought silently. He quietly extended his chopsticks and picked up a fat drumstick that Li Yun had just roasted. He sighed in his heart. He originally thought that Li Yun would be the god of spears on the battlefield, but he followed the wrong lord. His path of growth was a little crooked. Farming, knitting, and now he even mastered the technique of barbecuing. The outside was crispy and the inside was tender. When roasted, it was golden and crispy. Li Yun was a martial artist with sharp ears and eyes. How could he not know what Feng Jin was doing? But compared to eating, he enjoyed the feeling of barbecuing more. It was a great sense of accomplishment. Because it was a private gathering, and Jiang Pengji suspiciously emphasized that there was no need to be too restrained, Qiguan Rang simply threw aside the rule of not talking when eating and quietly enjoyed the fruits of Meng Han and the others' labor. When the district town stabilizes next year, Rang will want to bring my wife and daughter over. Xueqi was a little tempted, but he thought that Takshu, who was by Jiang Pengji's side, had not been dealt with. If he brought Xuanmei over, he was afraid that it would harm her. Thus, he could only bury this thought in his heart and quietly listen to it. He was preparing to imagine his goals for the coming year. Meng Han was a loner. Next year, he only wanted to help Jiang Pengji complete the conquest of Fengyi County. Luo Yue wanted to go back, but now he was on the pirate ship and could not get off. He could only sigh and accept his fate. Brother Li Yun said, "I hope Master can come back next year and reunite with me. Then, I can find a good wife and strive to become a father before the end of the year." Ever since the first batch of glass was sold, Jiang Pengji had money. She was also generous to her subordinates. She gave them a few months' worth of overtime pay and bonuses. Brother Li Yun was now considered a person with a small fortune. He had a house, money, and a car mount. Chapter 456. As long as the girls aren't blind, they would definitely fight over such an outstanding and handsome Lang Jun like Han Mei. Qiguan Rang laughed and teased. Every time Han Mei comes to the government office, the girls all stretch their necks to peek at him. It can be seen that he has a face that is pleasing to the eye. If Han Mei didn't know how to knit sweaters, the girls would have shyly asked him if he needed help knitting one for him. TSK. Li Yun may be a little naive, but when he is silent, he is a proper aloof Prince Charming. In terms of ability, his martial art skills are superb. In the whole of Xiangyang district, except for Jiang Pengji, no one can beat him. His shooting skills are really sharp and cunning. Meng Hun had sparred with him once before and sighed that the new generation supersedes the old. Youngsters nowadays are really amazing. Then Li Yun excitedly went to Jiang Pengji to spar and was almost smacked to death by her. In terms of looks, Li Yun is definitely the most handsome man in Xiangyang district. In Dongqing, he can be ranked in the top 3. His beauty is different from Wei Xi's peerless beauty. The latter almost blurs the barriers between genders and does not appear feminine. The former leans towards masculinity but does not appear tall and sturdy. His figure is tall, he looks thin when he is dressed, but he is muscular when he is undressed. His pair of eyes seems to be able to discharge electricity. When he silently and attentively stares at someone, almost no one can resist that silent charm. They feel the electric current passing through their body. Their whole body is limp and soft. Of course, this is only suitable for deceiving those who do not know the truth. If one is familiar with Li Yun, they will probably feel disillusionment. What happened to the aloof Prince Charming? Who is this silly and sweet person in front of him? One must know that the girls in the government office originally had a crush on him, but now they only see him as a cute little brother. Li Yun was praised and blushed silently. Master Wenjing's words are too complimentary. Yun is not that good. Jiang Pengji held the roasted meat dipped in chili sauce in her mouth and sucked it. She ridiculed. Wenjing's words are not wrong. But if Han Mei really wants to get a wife next year and become a father by the end of the year, it is best to speak less. If others stare at you, stare back. If others speak 10 sentences, reply with 1 word. Your gaze must be cold and your expression must be serious. Without speaking and with a cold face, he can arouse the hearts of young ladies with just his face and aura. Once he speaks, his intelligence will be exposed. Li Yun was puzzled. Isn't this very rude? Jiang Pengji snorted. If you didn't do that, you'd better stay obediently. Holding it in is a big problem. Li Yun looked at Qiguan Rang and the other 2 in confusion, trying to get an answer. From his point of view, other than his lord, the 3 teachers were the smartest. However, they only smiled and did not speak. They all gave him a meaningful look and had no intention of answering his questions. Meng Hun and Luo Yue sighed and patted Li Yun's shoulder. As for martial artists, it was fine as long as they had enough intelligence on the battlefield. There was no need to force it. I don't want to deal with these beasts who grew up drinking ink. At the dining table, they chatted while eating. Jiang Pengji had such an undisciplined personality in private. The others were not used to it at first, but they got used to it after a while. She took the roasted pheasant thigh that Li Yun passed to her and took a bite. Her mouth was filled with a delicious fragrance that spread across her taste buds. She opened her mouth and said, "The weather is getting colder and colder. There's nothing to do in the dead of winter. The people stay at home, either knitting sweaters or knitting sweaters. They're bored to death. I want to find something for them to do. I want to recruit some young and strong female soldiers and teach them first aid knowledge on the battlefield. They'll be useful after the spring plowing." Luo Yue looked at Jiang Pengji in shock. The others looked normal. Xueqi picked up a cooked mushroom with his chopsticks and dipped a large piece of bright red sauce on it. "That's fine. How many does my lord intend to recruit?" As the person in charge of the general accounts, Xueqi had a deeper understanding of women. They were indeed weaker than men, but their tenacity was not bad. Overall they worked as hard as men. Having seen the combat power of the female troops led by Jiang Nongqin, Xueqi did not have any objections. "Let's recruit 400 to 500 people first." She stuffed the chicken thigh into her mouth. With a few chomps, she spat out a complete bone. There was not even a bit of meat left on it. It could be seen how cleanly she had chewed it. Nongqin will lead 607 female troops. The rest will be 1,303 strong adult troops. After the new year, I'll ask them to meet up in Xiangyang district. All the female troops will be managed by Nongqin. Although they're the logistics team, the battlefield is ever-changing. They need to learn how to kill the enemy. It did not mean that the logistics team was really safe. There were many cases of sneak attacks on the enemy's logistics team in history. Jiang Pengji did not use the female troops as battlefield nurses. She hoped that they would really go on the battlefield to kill the enemy. However, the number of female troops was too small and their strength was weak. They still needed time to grow. Everything would start from being battlefield nurses. This woman, is a little inappropriate. Luoyue said hesitantly. Xueqi smiled and said, "Don't let Maiden Jiang hear this. Otherwise, she'll beat you up from the east gate to the west gate of the district." Maiden Jiang. Luoyue was puzzled. He had never heard of her. Xueqi said, "Maiden Jiang, full name Jiang Nongqin. She's a maid in the Lord's residence. When the Lord formed the troops, Maiden Jiang has been around. She's under Coach Meng." Speaking of her ruthlessness in killing people, even the most daring of men would not be able to help but shudder. If they fight with her, even Coach Meng won't be able to win. Meng Hun was named. He could not help but smile bitterly. He waved his hand and said, "Don't mention her. My whole body hurts when I mention her." Meng Hun was born for the battlefield. His martial arts skills were even more so. He used his strength to defeat the enemy. Jiang Nongqin was different. She knew her weaknesses. She simply avoided them and focused on strengthening her strengths. She was also half a disciple of Jiang Pengji. She more or less inherited Jiang Pengji's ruthless style. She targeted the enemy's weakness with every move. Once she was hit, she would either die or be injured. Meng Hun once wanted to compete with Nongqin. The troops were all watching at the drill ground. He was flirted with before he could react. It was also that time that Nongqin completely established her prestige. She was really not to be trifled with. After Meng Hun brought a portion of the troops to Chongzhou, the troops left in Hejian were all led by Nongqin. She even led the daily bandit extermination. She killed wherever she went. Very few people were left alive. Meng Hun deeply suspected that the reason the number of troops could not increase was because of Nongqin. Luoyue was surprised. "Is she a tigress? Is she that scary?" Meng Hun smiled and egged him on. "She's much scarier than that. When she comes, you can try her skills." Luoyue usually competed with Meng Hun when he had nothing to do. He naturally knew Meng Hun's ability. Even Meng Hun acknowledged Maiden Jiang. It could be seen that she was not an ordinary woman. Chapter 457. The first snowfall of early winter lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. Xiangyang district was doing pretty well. Until now, there had been no tragic incidents of people freezing to death in their homes or collapsing houses due to the snow. Wearing a thick sweater and a pair of woolen trousers, he wrapped himself in 2 more layers of thick clothes. After walking for a while, his body slowly warmed up. Which of them did not work since they were young? Their bodies were strong and their ability to withstand the cold was strong. Now that they had the sweaters and trousers to ward off the cold, this winter was simply too blissful. However, even though Jiang Pengji had worked so hard, some inharmonious things still happened from time to time. Sigh. This is the 4th child this month. The patrolling soldiers heard a baby crying in the alley. They went forward to check and found a tattered swaddling cloth lying in the snow. "It's a girl. These shameless old things." The soldier slightly lifted the swaddling cloth to take a look. It was indeed a girl. He felt some pity in his heart. He opened the collar and stuffed the child inside to keep her warm. The child had been crying in the snow for a long time out of survival instinct. Her little face had already turned blue. The soldier looked around and found that the door of a courtyard was slightly open. A pair of turbid eyes were focused on this corner. "Old bastard." The soldier spat in that direction and raised his hand to grip his gun tightly. The door immediately closed. The district magistrate now does not allow relatives to murder babies. He does not even allow pregnant women to have a miscarriage. This is equivalent to murder. Those people came up with this idea. They just throw the child out and let the child freeze or starve to death. Another patrolling soldier raised his hand and poked him, saying, "Send the child to the nursery. It's quite cold outside." If they really did not want to have a child, it was better to send the child to the nursery. They really did not understand why these old people were committing such crimes. After experiencing the tragic earthquake, these soldiers had a different understanding of life. They were not used to such acts of cruelty to the innocent. The district magistrate was benevolent. As long as each family was not lazy, they would be able to provide for their family. However, no matter how good the policy was, It could not stop some people who liked to lie on the ground and wait for a pie to fall from the sky. Not to mention other things, just the purchase of sweaters and trousers this winter. If the family worked diligently, they could earn 200 coins in 2 to 3 days. They would be allocated land the following spring. Their lives would only get better and better. How could they not be able to provide for a small baby? How much could such a small child eat? Some people didn't have a good life, but they didn't reflect on how lazy they were. They could only blame their family for having too many mouths to feed. The soldier looked coldly at the door, spat in disgust, and continued his patrol. That evening, Jiang Pengji received the news. Her joyful expression immediately turned gloomy. A bunch of hopeless trash. Jiang Pengji sneered. Her eyes were filled with uncontrollable disgust and contempt. I've checked. Which family are they from? Whoever lost their child would be arrested and thrown directly into the county headquarters prison to reflect on themselves. Do they really think that just because the children froze and starved to death in the ice and snow, they can't be considered to have killed them? Qiguan Rang and Feng Jin both had daughters, so they abhorred such a phenomenon. My lord, this is only treating the symptoms but not the root cause. Even though it was winter, Qiguan Rang did not let go of his feather fan. He muttered, even though there are new laws, if they don't want to raise those children, there are other ways. This is what it means when there are policies from above, there are countermeasures from below. When the time comes, there will only be more children who will suffer. It was still all right now. At least only a few children were lost. The scene that Qiguan Rang saw when he was young was considered tragic. Li Yun pinched his chin and suggested, why don't we let the families send the children they can't afford to raise directly to the nursery? Meng Hun hurriedly objected. He shook his head and said, this method won't work. What if those who are gluttonous and lazy and don't care about raising children keep giving birth? Let my lord be the spendthrift. Will the district headquarters really raise them? There are many such ignorant people. 100 grains of rice feed 100 people. Some people are simple and kind, but some are sharp and vicious. Jiang Pengji sat on the seat of honor and said coldly, this method is fine. Li Yun's eyes brightened. His suggestion was accepted? Jiang Pengji added, but the parents of the children sent to the nursery must sign a contract to cut off their blood ties. From today onwards, the two of them will not be able to see each other. No matter what happens to them in the future, they are not allowed to interfere with each other. If they are caught meeting in private, they will be punished. When the children grow up, they can speak however they want. There's no need to talk about blood ties. These people, do they really think that by venting their lust and giving birth to children, they are qualified to be parents? If the district headquarters finds out that someone deliberately mistreats children, once it's proven, they will be severely punished. Her words were harsh. She had long set the law that the elders and relatives could not arbitrarily take the lives of young children, but there were still people who knowingly broke the law. If there was no explanation, where would her authority as the district magistrate be? Jiang Pengji was silent for a while and said, I will let these children become useful people. They will not be ants in this chaotic world. The nursery not only had newborns, but there were also children of all ages who had been sold and abandoned. Most of them were girls. Jiang Pengji had seen them before. Each of them were like injured little beasts. They could only silently lick their wounds, their eyes filled with confusion. The flourishing Xiangyang district was still like that. What would the other places be like? She could not protect these people for a lifetime, but she could teach them how to protect themselves and become stronger. Cough, cough, cough. Cough sounded from the simple wooden house. The strong smell of medicine slowly drifted out. Master Zixiao, the medicine is ready. A skinny youth held a bowl of black medicine and said in a low voice. A hoarse reply came from inside the house. Upon entering, the sight was dim. A sickly youth was lying on the bed. It was Wei Ci who had walked for more than half a year but still could not reach the border of Xiangyang district. To be honest, his luck was really bad. It was to the extent that even drinking water could not fill the gaps between his teeth. Master Zixiao's face is pale, or do you feel cold? The youth asked, do you want to bring a mattress over? No need. Wei Ci endured the nausea and finished the bowl of medicine. He frowned and said weakly, it's just an old problem of having a cold body. It's very cold this winter. It's normal for the illness to break out. It's all right. I'll get better after a while. How are the arrangements outside? Are there any other problems? Don't worry, master. I'm leading everyone to make arrangements. Now that the snow has sealed the mountain, those beasts can't enter. The youth saw the weariness between Wei Si's brows and subconsciously lowered his voice. He quietly packed up the medicine bowl and left. He closed the door to prevent the cold wind from entering. Zhang Ping had a weed in his mouth and asked the youth, "How is Zixiao's condition?" "His fever has subsided, but his cough doesn't seem to be getting better. His entire body is as cold as an ice cube. It's worrying to see him." The youth sighed. There was only an unreliable barefoot doctor in the village. The medicinal herbs were also harvested by themselves. Who knew how effective the medicine was? How is Master Shiheng's arm? Chapter 458. It wasn't wrong to call Wei Si a sickly beauty. You're asking for it, aren't you? Zhang Ping pushed open the door. The room was dark, and the air was filled with the pungent smell of medicine. There was a faint smell of decay. He sat down beside Wei Si's bed with a helpless expression. Seeing his friend fall sick every other day, he felt sorry for him but was helpless. If this continues, I'll really become a medicine pot. Wei Si drank the medicine, and his cold limbs felt a little warm. He said, "Don't worry, I won't die." When he said this, he still looked nonchalant, but there was a hint of melancholy between his brows. Zhang Ping and Wei Si had known each other for many years. Naturally, he knew the environment he grew up in. He wasn't born afraid of the cold, but it was something he had to endure. He had been regarded as a jinx by the Wei clan since he was young, and his life had been difficult. Now that he had finally grown up, Wei Si also began to pay attention to his health. However, it wasn't something that could be done overnight. His complexion had improved a little, but he didn't cherish his body and insisted on going north. Zhang Ping didn't know what he was after. If he went north, then so be it. But this person's luck was so bad that even Zhang Ping started to doubt life. First, it was a serious illness. When he finally recovered, the three of them had just neared the border of Wanzhou when they encountered a plague. What was a plague? A demon that people would turn pale at the mention of. Wherever a plague occurred, it meant that the place would become a deserted hell on earth. The corpses would be exposed in the wilderness, and no one would collect them. The corpses would become food for birds and beasts, and the perfect breeding ground for maggots. Although Zhang Ping had compassion, he wasn't a fool. If he stayed here, he would be courting death. Wei Si was almost persuaded to leave by Zhang Ping, but he changed his mind just as he was about to leave. He found a seriously ill 7 or 8-year-old girl on the side of the road. Her clothes were ragged, and her face was sallow and emaciated. Her body was stained with unknown yellow pus, and she looked terrifying. When Wei Si saw her, her dark eyes were slightly open, and there was a desire to live in them. But in the end, she couldn't resist the disease. Her rapid breathing became weaker, and the light in her eyes gradually dimmed. A human life was fleeting before his eyes like a shooting star. This scene reminded him of a scene from many years ago. However, when he flipped through those memories, that heart-wrenching pain still lingered at the tip of his heart, causing him to feel a dull pain. This child has already stopped breathing, and his body still carries the smell of illness. It's better for a sickly person like you to stay away from him. Zhang Ping felt that he was becoming more and more like Wei Si's nanny. Every day, he had to put in so much effort to persuade him that his mouth was parched. Wei Si did not pay attention to Zhang Ping's words. A look of struggle and pain appeared on his face, but he finally calmed down. I can cure this disease. Stay. Wei Si's words were shocking. Zhang Ping was astonished and almost lost his voice. No, Wei Zixiao, with your little medical skills, you think you can cure the disease? Zixiao, this is an epidemic. It's not like other high heat and cold diseases. If you're not careful, you'll die. If you want to stay and save him, be careful that you don't get to save half his life. You might lose your life first. Xi's life is tough. I won't die. Wei Si smiled and secretly suppressed the memories that surfaced in his mind. He tried his best to make his expression look more natural. Shiheng, you should go on your way first. The plague is strong. I don't want you to be infected. We'll meet again in Xiangyang district. Zhang Ping spat on the inside. Even a sickly person dared to walk around the epidemic area. Why would he, a strong and healthy person with strong yang energy, be afraid of this? Reality proved that Xueqi could indeed treat the disease. His medical skills were not low. Looking at his posture, he seemed to have a lot of experience in treating diseases. Zhang Ping could only help him. Perhaps they were lucky enough and the precautions were strict enough. The two people and the servant did not get infected. However, Xueqi's complexion was getting worse by the day. The greenish hue under his eyes became more and more obvious. He looked more like a sick person than a sick person, as if he could be blown away by a gust of wind. Because of the epidemic, they were delayed in this place for more than 2 months. When they were completely rid of the shadow of the epidemic, Zhang Ping realized that he had lost a lot of weight. Needless to say, Xueqi was even more so. I couldn't tell that Zixiao had such a benevolent heart as a doctor. He was clearly not a proper medical student, but his medical skills were better than many medical officials who had been in the medical field for decades. TSK, the heavens were really unfair. Xueqi rubbed his face. He had been putting on a straight face for the past few days. He felt that the muscles on his cheeks were stiff. I studied a few medical books out of boredom. I only know a little. Zhang Ping was speechless. Back then, Xueqi said that he knew a little about carving. He took out the Sleeping Beauty pendant, which was not inferior to a master's work. Now, he said that he knew a little about medical books and was so skilled in treating diseases. He even saved many lives from the king of hell. Would it kill you not to be pretentious? Zhang Ping did not know what was pretentious, but he felt the same as the audience in the streaming room. He really wanted to beat this guy to death. Before Zhang Ping could make a move, more than 20 fierce-looking bandits rushed in from outside. Each of them had a knife in their hand. They were very fierce. They came up and asked who the doctor who treated the disease was. Without saying a word, they kidnapped Xueqi. They also took Zhang Ping and Zhang Ping's boy servant away. The bandits did not capture them for anything else but for Xueqi to treat their leader. Xueqi did not want to cooperate at first, but when he saw who the leader of the bandits was, he agreed. Although they were bandits, these people did not have the time to do anything bad. They had no choice but to become bandits. How do you know that they had no choice? Zhang Ping was puzzled. He did not say anything. Xueqi said coldly, "It should be the Tsing-Yi army's doing." The Tsing-Yi army recruited prostitutes everywhere and sent people to remote places to kidnap women and young girls. These bandits were also dissatisfied with this, so they raised their knives and rebelled. Since they have not committed any crimes, what's wrong with me saving his life? Zhang Ping was speechless. Recruiting prostitutes in the camp, kidnapping women and bringing them to the army to be prostitutes. This, Xueqi sneered. Is this rare? Since ancient times, there have been no women in the army. This does not mean that there are no women in the army camp. It's just that those women do odd jobs in the day and serve the men at night to satisfy their lust. The Tsing-Yi army only revealed their bestial nature. Many military camps in Dongqing were secretly like this, including the former residence of the Count of Zhenbei and the Meng family of Cangzhou. This kind of thing had long been tacitly acknowledged by many people, including the famous General Meng Jing, who was famous throughout the ages. Many people feel that they fight for their family and country, so it's natural for women to help meet their needs. Little do they know that most of these women are women from good families or rural women. Forget it, why am I telling you this? In the past, Xueqi was also so ignorant. He had seen a lot and experienced a lot. Naturally, he understood a lot. But it's not only sinful women who become prostitutes in the camp. How can there be so many sinful women in the world? Xueqi sneered coldly. His gentle eyes were frozen with frost. Chapter 459. In the end, Xueqi still managed to cure the bandit chief. Zhang Ping did not know what his companion had said to the bandit chief, but the two of them, a servant, had leaped from being prisoners to being honored guests of the bandits. The bandits were very polite to them, and this sudden change had shocked Zhang Ping. When he asked Xueqi, he only smiled without saying a word. Keep hiding it. One day, I'll make you spit it out on your own. Zhang Ping was annoyed. He was already very curious, but his companion was still keeping him in suspense. It was really annoying. After a while, these bandits actually succeeded in ambushing a small group of Tsing-Yi army. There were only 83 bandits in total, but they managed to save many innocent women from the hands of Xueqi army, who were 5 times their number. Not only that, these bandits were very particular about tactics. Every time, they would harass them once and then leave, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. This was obviously not the quality of a gang of bandits born in the wild. After a long while, Zhang Ping finally reacted. Wei Ci was actually teaching these bandits how to maximize the advantage of the mountains. "Wait, Zixiao, what are you doing?" Zhang Ping poked Wei Ci. He could not understand his companion's thoughts. Wei Ci sneered and said calmly, "It's already a chaotic world now. The north of Dongqing has become the battlefield of Xueqi army and Red Lotus Group. The imperial court and Prince Changsho are in a stalemate in the south. It's obviously impossible for the 3 of us to travel north safely. Who knows if we'll be kidnapped by Red Lotus Group or Xueqi army on the way." To be honest, even if he was a man, it was very unsafe for him to travel with such a face. Wei Ci was not a narcissistic person, but he knew how much trouble this face would attract. Zhang Ping asked, "So?" Wei Ci's gaze fell outside. His gaze was meaningful, his dark and bright eyes narrowed slightly. "I pointed them out the right path and they gave us a lift. These bandits originally planned to join the other side, but they were indignant. Before they left, they wanted to take revenge for their family members who died in vain. Coincidentally, Ci could lend him a helping hand. That bandit leader is a loyal man. He promised me that if we succeed in our revenge, he'll be willing to escort us to Xiangyang district." Zhang Ping almost laughed. "You actually believe the words of a bandit?" Wei Ci tapped his fingers on the short table and said in a low voice, "I don't dare to trust others, but this person can be trusted." In fact, Wei Ci did not expect to meet Dian Yan in this place. Who was Dian Yan? At this point in time, he would at most be described as a boorish man in the mountains. However, Wei Ci remembered that this person would be one of the 10 founding generals of the Zhang dynasty. He would be an upright man who had followed Lu Shi from the very beginning. He would accompany her from a female bandit leader to a feudal lord and finally become the ruler of the world. She had a bad reputation, but Dian Yan was one of the few who did not waver in his loyalty. In his previous life, Wei Ci had only hoped to use his talents to assist a wise ruler, to help a wise ruler to pacify the world as soon as possible and return peace to the world. To put it bluntly, he, Wei Ci, had never been loyal to anyone. He was loyal to the people of the world, not just one person. After his old master was defeated and died, he did not die for his master, nor did he live in seclusion. He followed his heart and surrendered to Zhang Pengji. With the situation of the world at that time, the only way for him to realize his ambitions was to seek refuge with a new master. As he was a newly surrendered strategist, he did not deliberately display himself in the beginning to avoid provoking hatred and offending people. He usually followed the principle of listening more, watching more, doing more and talking less. His presence was low and he was almost invisible. He maintained a shallow relationship with most of the people. The only person he had a little interaction with seemed to be Dian Yan. There was a period of time in the imperial court where cliques were formed for personal gain. Dian Yan had always been a lone ranger and was only loyal to the emperor. This upright man had a rough and fierce appearance. He had a full beard on his face. In fact, his character was slightly introverted and shy, but his heart was clear. When most of the people looked down on Wei Ci, only Dian Yan maintained his normal attitude. Now, Lu Shi was no longer a bandit. She was the legitimate son of an aristocratic family of the Lu family. Naturally, the two of them had no chance to get to know each other through fighting. Thinking of Dian Yan's heavy injuries and the maggots crawling on his wounds, Wei Ci could not help but break out in a cold sweat. If he had come too late, perhaps the future brave General Dian Yan would no longer exist. Wei Ci did not purposely change anything. He only wanted to be a matchmaker. In the previous life, the emperor subdued Dian Yan and made him follow her with all his might. If the fate of the monarch and the minister still existed, Dian Yan should belong to her. If they were not fated, she would not force it. In short, he did not care so much. He had to kidnap him to Xiangyang district first. Zhang Ping saw that Wei Ci spoke with such conviction. He could not help but restrain his contempt. Most of the youths who followed Dian Yan to become bandits were of the same age in the same village or neighboring villages. He had been their big brother since they were young, so his words carried a lot of weight. He was the leader of the gang of bandits. Everyone packed their luggage and prepared to head north. On the way, they made a living by robbing the Xueqi army and saved some innocent people. Sometimes, in order to avoid the Xueqi army, they had to take a long detour. Slowly, the entire troop expanded to more than 500 people. Although their speed was slow, they were indeed nearing Xiangyang district. Blessings do not come in pairs and misfortunes do not come alone. That day, the weather temperature plummeted. Without any warning, Xueqi fell ill and had a high fever for 2 consecutive days. Unfortunately, they were discovered by a troop of 2,000 members of the Xueqi army at that moment. Actually, it was not a big deal to be discovered. What was worse was that they had just robbed the Xueqi army's rations team. New hatred and old hatred. How could the Xueqi army let them off so easily? Helpless, everyone could only retreat to the deep mountains under Zhang Ping's command. Relying on Zhang Ping and Xueqi's knowledge of making mechanisms, they made use of the mountain terrain for defense. In addition, the snow sealed the mountain, so the Xueqi army did not dare to go deep. Everyone was considered safe for the time being. Fortunately, there was an unreliable doctor among them who knew how to prescribe a prescription to reduce fever. Otherwise, even if Xueqi did not die from the fever, he would have become a fool. With great difficulty, his fever subsided, but his cough came back again. "I've known you for so many years, but I never knew your body was so weak." Zhang Ping sighed. Xueqi smiled bitterly. "I don't know either." His body looked weak, but in reality, it was not that bad. He had not fallen ill in his previous life. He did not know what happened to him in this life, but he seemed to be exceptionally unlucky. Not to mention in this half a year, he suffered from one serious illness after another. "Sigh, maybe it's God's will." Xueqi sighed. Zhang Ping said, "You're a sickly beauty who torments yourself all day long. What does that have to do with God's will? God would not take the blame for his own death. If it was the Xueqi of the past, he would definitely fall out with anyone who called him a sickly beauty. Now he was more thick-skinned. Shi Heng doesn't understand. God is fair. If you gain something extra, you might lose something else. What kind of opportunity was it to commit suicide and return to the prime of one's life? If he lost his health because of this, he would not feel that it was a loss." Zhang Ping glanced sideways at the nagging Xueqi and said unhappily, "You just take good care of yourself and try to regain some weight. Anyway, before the snow melts, we can't go down the mountain." Chapter 460. If not for his best friend taking care of him, Xueqi felt that he would have died long ago. Do the people have enough food? We robbed 6 carriages of Xueqi army. If we eat sparingly, it won't be a problem to get through the winter. What about clothes to keep out the cold? He resisted the urge to cough. It was hard to hold it in. Zhang Ping said, "Don't worry, they won't freeze to death." In order to cope with this winter, almost every commoner had brought enough clothes with them. If they killed Xueqi army, not only would they plunder their food, but they would also strip them of their clothes and take them away. The clothes were not clean, but they could be wrapped around the body to keep warm. Xueqi was slightly relieved and suddenly thought of something. He said, "If there's nothing important, tell them not to stay in the snow for too long, in case they get eye diseases." Zhang Ping nodded in agreement. This year's winter was probably the most wretched that Xueqi had ever experienced in his memory. There was a lack of medicinal herbs in the mountains. Xueqi's cough did not improve. In addition to his fear of the cold, his complexion was greener than usual. When his illness was serious, even the rise and fall of his chest could not be noticed. His appearance made many people worried. Dian Yan secretly looked for Zhang Ping. "Mr. Shiheng, why don't I carry Mr. Zixiao down the mountain to see a doctor?" Zhang Ping looked calm on the surface, but he was worried about Xueqi's illness. There was no medicine that could cure the illness. If it dragged on, a minor illness could become a life-threatening illness. Dian Yan said, "I heard from a few people that it's only a day's journey from here to Xiangyang district." "I can walk fast," Zhang Ping said worriedly. "We don't know if the Xueqi army has retreated. Now the mountain is sealed by heavy snow. It's difficult for you to go down the mountain alone, let alone bring a sick person like Zixiao." The more he spoke, the less confident Zhang Ping was. His tone gradually became softer. He could also see that if he continued to drag on, no one knew if Wei Xi's illness would continue to worsen. After a while, Zhang Ping changed his words. Then be careful. Dian Yan was tall and burly. Just by standing, he was more than 2 heads taller than an ordinary man. His body was even more burly and strong. He carried the unconscious Wei Ci on his back and carefully instructed the brothers from the same village to listen to Zhang Ping's words when he was not around. If this trip went smoothly, not only would Wei Ci be treated, they could also call for reinforcements. Dian Yan followed a person who knew the way down the mountain. The 3 of them disappeared into the pure white snow. Wei Ci's consciousness was blurry, various images appeared in front of his eyes from time to time, but finally it was fixed in the lofty palace. The late emperor had passed away, the officials were kneeling on the ground, each with their own thoughts. He pulled out his sword and committed suicide. This scene, repeated over and over again. In the end, Wei Ci could not even tell if he was still alive or if he had already killed himself. He vaguely remembered that he had returned to the prime of his youth after that incident. Everything had to start all over again. Which one was the real one? He was already dead, but he was still alive. Dian Yan was wrapped in heavy clothes. The 3 of them walked down the mountain with difficulty. They had to pay attention to the path under their feet at all times. No one knew what was under the accumulated snow. If they stepped on air or slipped, he would have to roll down the mountain with Wei Ci. Normally, it would take at most an hour to complete the mountain path. But now, it had taken them almost 6 hours. It had stopped snowing not long ago, but now it was fluttering again. The cold wind carried the ice and snow, blowing on their faces, as if a small knife was slowly dismembering their flesh. Dian Yan was born boorish. He asked the person leading the way to help him keep a close eye on Wei Ci, who was on his back, to prevent him from catching a cold and the wind. Brother Dian, the teacher has dropped something. The youth behind him trembled as he crouched down and picked up the perfume bag that had dropped. Dian Yan took a look and said, I'll take it, you keep a close eye on the teacher. The 3 of them descended the mountain with difficulty. The only thing to be thankful for was that the Xueqi army that had surrounded and intercepted them had already retreated. Wait, don't move. The youth leading the way was just about to take a step when Dian Yan pulled him over. There's someone. They found a place to hide. The youth had a puzzled look on his face. Who would come out at this time of the year? However, not long after, the sound of horse hooves could be heard from afar. The youth looked at Dian Yan with admiration. Don't be fooled by his boorish and frightening appearance. His ability was not weak. The approaching people seemed to be going into the mountains to hunt. There was a group of 20 people, each dressed in hunting attire, carrying a bow and arrow, and a quiver hanging from their waists. The youth wanted to go out and ask for help, but Dian Yan did not allow it. Instead, he pulled him back tightly. A pair of eyes that resembled copper bells slightly squinted, staring at the leader of the group. It was a youth dressed in watercolored clothes, with a thick and warm cloak draped over his body. His face was hidden in the wind and snow, so it could not be seen clearly. Dian Yan did not move. The group also did not move. The youth who was the leader sat on the horse with a faint smile, his gaze faintly glancing in his direction. I've been discovered? Dian Yan's heart was shocked. He was so nervous that his palms were sweating. My lord, what's wrong? The hunter who was leading the way saw that Zhang Pengji did not move. His face was full of confusion. There was no prey here. Zhang Pengji played with the horsewhip, putting on a posture that said, If you don't move, I'll guard here, let's see who moves first. Today, Li Yun accompanied Zhang Pengji out to hunt for wild game. To be honest, barbecuing and having a meal together was as addictive as knitting. They had just eaten 2 days ago. Today, the few men in the government office smacked their lips, feeling hungry again. It was time for the Lord to go out and hunt, bring back wild game, and continue to have a barbecue gathering. Li Yun naturally noticed that there were people hiding around. He slightly moved his horse forward and asked Zhang Pengji with his eyes. She said, Wait. After a while, it was Dian Yan who gave in first. They were carrying a patient on their backs, and they did not have enough clothes to keep them warm. How could they compare to the enemy who was fully armed? Hiding like this was not a solution. Dian Yan faintly felt that his limbs were stiff and numb. In the end, he sighed and slowly moved out from his hiding place. As soon as he revealed himself, more than 10 bows and arrows were aimed at him. Ambush! Li Yun raised his eyebrows. looking at the tall and sturdy man who was completely fearless, and then looking at the youth beside him who was trembling. This combination was interesting. Jiang Pengji said calmly, "No, it's probably a passerby who got lost." Her gaze swept to a certain spot, her brows tightly knitted together. That sachet. Dian Yen took a deep breath. Just as he was about to speak, Jiang Pengji raised her hand and ordered people to put down the bows and arrows. "Who is this person on your back?" Jiang Pengji asked White to step forward. She said in a gentle tone, "I am the magistrate of Xiangyang district." "What?" Dian Yan's eyes widened in shock. He sized her up in disbelief. It did not seem like it. His lips moved. After a while he said, "I am sick and urgently need to find a doctor to treat me." "Sir?" Jiang Pengji jumped off the horse and stepped forward. "Your sir? Is his surname Wei?" Dian Yen was startled. He said, "His surname is indeed Wei." Jiang Pengji asked Dian Yen to untie Wei Ci from his back. "Let me see. I know your sir." Looking closely, it was indeed that familiar face, but it was thinner and weaker than she remembered. His face was pale and bloodless. Dian Yen used his body to block the wind. He stammered, The wind is strong," Jiang Pengji frowned. Without thinking, she untied the cloak on her body and wrapped it around Wei Ci. Then, she carried him horizontally and leaped onto the horse. Chapter 461. So thin? When she carried Wei Ci just now, Jiang Pengji had already noticed that although Wei Ci was tall, he was very light. Now that she was carrying him in her arms, she could feel his bones. It felt like he had no flesh on his body, only his bones were left. She couldn't help but suspect if this fellow had gone to some food shortage area to stay for a year and lost the few pounds of flesh he had. She secretly used her fingers to touch his waist. Her first impression was that he was thin, too thin. Jiang Pengji wrapped Wei Ci up tightly and hugged him in her arms as she ordered White to run at full speed. The oncoming cold wind blew on her face. It was painful, but Jiang Pengji didn't feel anything. Instead, Wei Ci unconsciously shivered and hid in her arms. She sighed softly, one hand holding the reins, the other passing under his armpit to press on the back of his head, trying to block the biting cold wind. On the other side, Dian Yen watched helplessly as Jiang Pengji carried his master away. Her entire set of movements were as smooth as flowing water, completed in one breath. Dian Yen couldn't stop her in time. He didn't even have time to react before White had already galloped away. Li Yun said, "Big brother, don't worry, the Lord said she knows your master, then she definitely knows him." Dian Yan's lips quivered. Now he could only trust the youth who claimed to be the magistrate of Xiangyang district. His master's illness couldn't be delayed any longer. At the side, Li Yun's curiosity was aroused. His gossipy nature was abnormally active. "Big brother, where is your master from?" Li Yun had been watching the whole process. He also saw Wei Ci's appearance. Although the patient was very sick and thin, it didn't make him ugly or scary. Instead, it added a sense of fragility that made one feel pity for him. Li Yun had never seen a man who was so handsome even when he was sick. Dian Yen replayed the scene in his mind. Although Jiang Pengji's movements were fast, they weren't rough. Just based on this detail, he felt slightly at ease. Hearing Li Yun's question, Dian Yen was silent. He had an expression that said, "I don't want to talk to strangers, shut up." Li Yun was rebuffed, so he changed his question. He carefully noticed that the three of them came down from the mountains. "Hey, what happened to you and your master? Why are you in such a sorry state? I think you and your master are really weird. You're tall and sturdy, you're full of meat, but your master is so skinny. Can illness really make a person so thin? Hey, say something." The first snowfall lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. The snow had already covered the mountain. Could it be that these people ran up the mountain to seek refuge, but unfortunately ran into the heavy snow and had no choice but to bite the bullet and go down the mountain for treatment? Dian Yen didn't want to bother with Li Yun, because the handsome youth in front of him was too noisy. However, when he thought of the 500 or so commoners still trapped on the mountain, he hesitated, his rough face revealing a bit of desire. "There are still more than 500 people trapped on the mountain. We were chased by the Tsing-Yi army and had no choice but to escape to the mountain to seek refuge." Li Yun. Yun said. Li is. Ci. Yun. Li. Li. Yun was. Yun. Yun said. When Dian Yen heard this, he could only do so. He cupped his fists and thanked Li Yun. Hey, what's there to thank? Li Yun scratched his head and said shyly, It's part of my duty. As long as it was within the borders of Xiangyang district, the affairs of the people were the affairs of the district headquarters. Li Yun was just short of patting his chest to guarantee it. On the other side, Jiang Pengji galloped on her horse. She rushed to Xiangyang district as fast as she could. Wei Ci was still in a nightmare. Fragmented memories filled his brain, blurring his sense of life and death. After an unknown amount of time, his cold and stiff body started to warm up. The jolt turned from illusory to solid. Was this a dream or something else? Wei Ci frowned in discomfort. He coughed twice strenuously. He thought he coughed loudly, but to Jiang Pengji, it sounded like a kitten's meow. If not for her good hearing, she might not have realized he was awake. After a long while, Wei Ci managed to regain consciousness. Only then did he realize that he could not move his entire body. You're awake. A cold and familiar voice came from above his head. Wei Ci's expression changed. He could not tell if it was a dream or reality. If you're awake, say something first. There's still some time before we reach the district. If you fall asleep now, I can't guarantee you'll wake up again. Jiang Pengji lowered her body slightly to reduce the resistance of the wind. I realize that every time I see you, you're either sick or walking on the path of illness. Have you been so frail and sickly since you were young? Wei Ci's consciousness returned completely. He realized his current situation. He was so scared that his body tightened. He did not dare to move. Of course, based on his current situation, he could not move even if he wanted to. Jiang Pengji wanted to speak, but Wei Ci's fans in the streaming room were not having it. Simia Miawo, streamer, my Simia Miawo is already so sick. Don't bully him. Jin Tian wooging you. That's right, that's right. But a beauty is a beauty. Even if she's skinny, she's still beautiful. Debt finally reduces. Beauty is in her bones, not her skin. She's not like those internet celebrities nowadays. Her big eyes need surgery, her nose bridge needs filling, her chin needs a file, and her skin needs injections. With such a face, after the hyaluronic acid dissolves, even her biological mother would not be able to recognize her. Evening date. Your topic is off. Didn't we ask the streamer not to bully Simia Miawo? Jiang Pengji did not have the mood to bully Wei Ci even without the audience's reminder. She had a sullen face, but Wei Ci could not speak of his suffering. He was so scared that he did not even dare to sleep. Jiang Pengji was taller than the average girl by a head, but she was no worse than a boy. Wei Ci curled up into a ball. He became so thin and weak that he could really nestle in her arms. Coupled with her movements, their current posture was a little subtle. Wei Ci's face was facing her chest. This was a little awkward. Wei Ci's cheeks were a little red. It was okay when he was unconscious, but now that he was slightly awake, he wanted to distance himself as far as possible. Why are you moving? Be careful that I throw you off the horse. Jiang Pengji warned him impatiently. Wei Ci held it in for a while before saying, Men and women shouldn't touch each other. I don't believe what you said. She sneered coldly. Her words were shocking. Wei Ci was so scared that he did not dare to make a sound. Even his dizzy brain became a little clearer. She said, You're someone who knows me so well. Are you sure that our relationship really stops at the bottom line of shouldn't touch each other when giving or receiving something? She did not know what Wei Ci had experienced, but his reaction and the existence of the system allowed her to imagine a lot. Chapter 462. Both of them did not speak. There was only the sound of the wind and the horse's hooves on the ground. The city gate was wide open and there were no pedestrians on the streets. She galloped to the entrance of the district headquarters. Lifting him off the horse, Dabai ran to the front of the servant's door and looked at him disdainfully. The servant felt pressured. He grabbed White's reins and brought it to the stable. Jiang Pengji had a smooth journey. She entered her room in the backyard of the district headquarters. She shouted on the way, Go get the doctor. There were no skilled doctors in Xiangyang district, but they hired a few later. Zhang Pengji even allocated a medical center for them. They could take in apprentices and be the in-house doctors. They would take turns to be on duty. The operation was similar to a hospital. The doctors were hired by Zhang Pengji with a high salary. The medical center was also the district headquarters property. The doctors worked for the government and received a high salary. Except for a very few people, they would not visit the people's houses for consultation. If the people were sick, they would come and ask for medicine. This was much more efficient than the doctors visiting the people's houses to treat them. The servants in the district headquarters heard this and quickly sent someone to invite the doctor who was on day off. Zhang Pengji used her leg to open the door and placed Wei Ci on the bed. She started a few charcoal pots and the room became warm quickly. Takshu rushed over when she heard the news. She was almost scared to death by the strange man on Zhang Pengji's bed. She stammered, Lang Jun, this is a good friend. I met him when I went hunting today. He's very sick. Zhang Pengji said indifferently, get someone to bring some hot water and prepare some clean and warm clothes. Although Wei Ci was thin, his frame was the standard of a normal man. He was wider than Zhang Pengji. But he was so thin that he could barely fit Zhang Pengji's clothes. After a while, the doctor who was on day off rushed over with a medical box. He first greeted Zhang Pengji, then sat down and checked Wei Ci's pulse. The doctors Zhang Pengji hired were all capable and worthy of the salary she paid. In a short while, the doctor had figured out Wei Ci's condition. He won't die, right? Zhang Pengji asked. Wei Ci, who was pretending to be dead, raised his eyebrows. He still did not dare to open his eyes. The doctor's hand that was stroking his beard paused. He laughed and said, I won't. Looking at his pulse, this Longjuan's bones were slightly cold. Previously, he had not recovered from a serious illness and had some lingering symptoms. Later, he had worked hard and was physically and mentally exhausted. He did not have a good rest. Now that he was seriously ill, it was actually a good thing. The hidden illness had been drawn out. Therefore, although Longjuan's illness seems to be dangerous, if you take good care of yourself, you will be better off than before. Zhang Pengji asked, how? The doctor wrote out a prescription and listed all the herbs in detail. He also warned her about the areas that she needed to pay attention to. As the saying goes, food is better than medicine. When Longjuan's body recovers, you can adjust your body with a medicated diet. Every medicine had its side effects. Wei Ci could not afford to go through too much trouble. Zhang Pengji said, it's good to eat nutritious food. It can also make people fatter. He asked someone to take the prescription to the clinic and get the medicine. A maid came in with a few basins of hot water. Suddenly, the live stream viewers had an ominous feeling. With a clap, the screen went dark. No, she turned off the live stream. The viewers were all dumbfounded. Zhang Pengji stretched her hand to Wei Ci's waist and prepared to pull off the belt. You! Wei Ci could not bear it anymore. He suddenly opened his eyes. He raised his hand and wanted to stop her, but it was difficult for him to even speak, let alone stop Zhang Pengji. Don't worry. Who would like that body of yours? Zhang Pengji said disdainfully. This is the inner court. There are no other men except me. Are you planning to let other maids help you wipe? You have to get my permission, right? Tiske, I didn't expect you to have such thoughts. Although Wei Ci was skinny, he was still an adult man. Ordinary maids could not help him. Otherwise she would not have done it. Wei Ci's cheeks were flushed with anger. I didn't. Okay, I got it. Don't move. Zhang Pengji did not even blink. She removed his clothes quickly and made him sit up and lean against her. She used a hot towel to wipe him. Seeing his upper body clearly, Zhang Pengji could not help but sigh. He was so skinny that only his bones were left. His ribs could be seen. After wiping him with hot water, he changed into new clothes. It was warmer this way. If he lay directly on the bed, he would not know when he would warm up. Zhang Pengji's mouth was vicious. She said, fortunately you can still speak. Otherwise, I would have thought you were a corpse. The temperature of his skin was very low. Although it was not as cold as a corpse, it was enough to make one shiver. Wei Ci was extremely embarrassed and annoyed. He simply closed his eyes and allowed her to help him change into a brand new inner garment and a thick woolen shirt. Compared to the bone-piercing cold just now, he slowly felt the warmth. He could also slowly feel his limbs. After a while, 2 basins of hot water were changed. Wei Si's pale face was stained with blood. Seeing his behavior, Jiang Pengji crossed her arms in front of her chest and said, "Why are you so shy? In terms of figure, you don't look much better. You're so skinny that only your bones are left. What do you think I will do to you? You don't have to look like a little wife who has been molested." He looked aggrieved and made her look like a beast. "Lang Jun, the medicine is ready." Taksha's voice came from outside the room. Jiang Pengji sat by the bed. Hearing the voice, she raised her head and said calmly, "Come in." Looking at it, she unfolded a set of mattresses that was folded on the side of the bed and covered Wei Si with another layer. With 2 layers of thick quilts covering him, Wei Si almost could not breathe. "Don't sit up. Just turn your body slightly and drink the medicine. Otherwise, it will be cold one moment and hot the next to prevent your condition from worsening." Takshu entered the room and found that Jiang Pengji still had an indifferent expression, while the unfamiliar Lang Jun was embarrassed and angry. Wei Si sniffed the smell of the medicine and knew that it was a good medicine for his condition. He closed his eyes and swallowed it, no matter how bitter it was. Slowly drinking the medicine, Wei Si raised his head and found that she was sitting by the bed with her head lowered. Beside her hand was a pile of official documents. She did not pay attention to Wei Si from evening to night, which made him secretly feel relieved and less awkward. When the lights were turned on, Takshu came over and asked if he wanted a new mattress. Jiang Pengji said, "No need." Wei Si had slept in the afternoon. His brain was still a little heavy and his thinking was slow. When he came to his senses, he almost broke out in a cold sweat. "You?" Jiang Pengji slightly squinted her eyes and asked him with a smile, "Aren't you my strategist?" Wei Si replied, "That's exactly what I mean. In order to show respect, don't we all have the habit of sleeping with our feet touching each other's to show respect?" Jiang Pengji smiled and whispered in his ear. Wei Si's body stiffened. She never knew that the bed could be so cold. "You've been lying there for the whole afternoon. Why are you still so cold?" Wei Si held back his emotions and asked her, "What exactly do you want to do?" "I originally wanted to sleep in the bed. Who knew that you're still so cold after lying there for the whole afternoon?" Jiang Pengji looked at Wei Si with a reproachful gaze. The latter was speechless. She said, "Don't be so nervous. Even if you're healthy, what can you do to me? Sleep better. Otherwise, I don't want to wake up and find that I killed someone." Wei Si was silent for a long time and said, "Gossip is a fearful thing." You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.